Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku was Aizawa's soulmate? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. Chapter 21. Notes. Okay, enjoy this chapter. Have an important note at the end. See the end of the chapter for more notes. And we're back. Eraser, when did you come back and where's Mummy Man? Yamada shouted in surprise as Aizawa stretched then sat in the chair. I got healed, he said simply, watching Midoriya walk out nervously. It was still something to get used to, a bond being so strong the fated can feel the other's emotions. But it did have its perks. For one, Midoriya could feel Aizawa's presence just enough to not have a panic attack at times. Another reason is he could send reassurance, as weird as that sounds, to Midoriya if he ever felt timid and wanted to back away instead of fighting. Aizawa enjoyed having a bond like this, as rare as it is, because he could just sense him. This constant reassurance that Midoriya was okay is something grounding for the pro. So Eraser, you've been spacing out and everyone is dying to know, who is that soulmate of yours? Yamada shot him an apologetic look. The producers hounded him to ask while they had a break before the second round started. Aizawa knew it was out of his best friend's range as well, after sitting in a radio booth for hours just waiting for a show to be done only for a higher-up to demand something new of it. Someone close to me, he replied, sighing as he felt Midoriya calm his own anxiety. Eraser, he is your soulmate after all, of course, he would be close. Does the audience get any hints? Aizawa knew he had to say something. Yamada would get in trouble for not asking after all. My soulmate is cuter than all of yours. Aizawa could feel the pride and anxiety coursing through the bond. He didn't have to look to see how embarrassed Midoriya was. A small smirk rested on his face. He would definitely tease him later. Well, I think that's all I can get out of the former Mummy Man, but at least we know he's proud of his soulmate for entering the tournament. That got roaring applause and cheers for the bond. It wasn't easy living with a bond, and one that had an age gap like theirs was even harder to have, with all the hate people can get from it. So it was easy to say both Midoriya and Aizawa were ecstatic for the other. After that break, you must be dying to see what tortuous even we have for you next, Midnight called, liking her lips. And don't worry, the punishment is worth the wait. Once again the board had started to roll. Different punishments, as Midnight called it, were flashing and it was slowing down quickly. It came to a rolling stop on one Midoriya thought was good for a quirkless student, if they knew how to think and observe, that is. Prepare yourselves for the cavalry battle, Midnight called, a sly smile on her face. For those of you in the top, you will suffer the most. Dash, she pointed the flail towards him. Midoriya Izuku will be worth 10 million points. Midoriya's head hung low. He could feel the burning gazes from the other classes and even his own classmates. His heart throbbed as his anxiety started to swallow him whole. You will never be anything more than a quirkless Deku. I'm sorry, young man, you can't be a hero. You're quirkless. You're my hero, Midoriya. That thought resonated louder than the others trying to poison him. He could feel the bond thrumming, trying to soothe his almost spiraling panic attack. Looking up to the booth, he could see Aizawa ready to speak into the mic, but Yamada was bickering about something. Stop feeling and think, he thought, Midnight's voice droning on. Everyone else will want to avoid me. I have a chance to prove that you don't need a quirk to be a hero. I just need a team who believes that too. He looked up to see Aizawa turning away from the scene, and Yamada smiled once again, though Midoriya could clearly tell it was fake. Once again Eraser was bickering over his soulmate. I swear he's about as stubborn as he. Dash, Yamada paled and cut the mic. It only brought an onslaught of shouts of confusion from the audience. Eraserhead is bonded to a male student. Who could it be? I wonder if it's someone from his class. Was the bond forced? Maybe the poor kid was forced into it? Midoriya, don't, Uraraka whispered. Midnight was calling something into the earpiece, most likely scolding Yamada for revealing too much. Midoriya was ready to call out and defend his soulmate. It wasn't forced and he cared too much about him, but Uraraka sensed this somehow and stopped him. If you reveal now that you're bonded and quirkless, people might think you're only in the hero course because he's your soulmate. She wasn't wrong, and Midoriya despised that she wasn't wrong. He fought tooth and nail to be where he was, and shouting about his soulmate would ruin everything. And yet that wasn't the reason he didn't shout. It was the flooding of anxiety that wasn't his that did. He knew if he shouted Aizawa would be proud, but he would be terrified that much attention is now brought to their still new bond. Now you have 15 minutes to make your team. I recommend you get started. Midnight suddenly shouted, then marched away, presumably to shout into the mic at Yamada. I have 15 minutes to make a team. It doesn't matter their points because I have so many. I just need to make sure I pick the right people. Midoriya thought. Then he snapped his head up, trying to see what was happening. He started to walk around, trying to find his ideal teammates, though he has planned for this in a way, so there are many combinations to try. But the more he walked, the more and more people avoided him. This isn't good. I won't be able to find a team I have a combo for at this point. Hey Midoriya, did you want to be in a team with me? Uraraka called. He started to get teary-eyed. His panic was subsiding as she walked over. Are you sure? He stuttered out, whipping away any stray tears. She nodded, then looked around. It will be hard trying to find other people. Midoriya started to drone her out, trying to remember all ideas he had for her quirk and who he had paired with her. Ida, where is Ida? He snapped his head around before running straight towards him. He pulled him aside and started to strategize. That I know it's not much, but it's the only evasive plan I could think of in such little time. It was a lie. He's planned for too many scenarios and groups now. He was ready to throw another one out there when Ida spoke up. A good strategy, but I'm sorry, I must refuse your offer. Midoriya had a feeling he would. After his confession, they haven't had time to talk yet. Since this all started, I've been losing to you. Please don't take this as an insult. You're a great friend, but if I continue to follow you, I won't get any better. I understand, Midoriya said simply and walked away. Even though it was on its surface an apology for not joining, it was really his apology for trying to get in between Midoriya and Aizawa. He turned his head to see Ida beaming brightly. His apology was accepted and he didn't lose Midoriya. Midoriya, Hatsum called. He lifted his head to see her running towards him. Are you still looking for people to join your team? I can join. Hatsum? He was a tad confused, though it wasn't like he hadn't planned for a support class member to join their team, just not one who was wearing a ton of gear. The team to look out for, the team with the most spotlight, and my babies need the spotlight. She practically shouted. Midoriya knew what she was talking about and asking for, but Uraraka was still confused. Alright, tell me what they can do in a moment. We need another person. He said, knowing fully well she would start to ramble the moment he finished talking, had he not said to wait. Tokoyami, will you join my team? He asked, though this wasn't a planned-out team. Uraraka and Hatsum words, he would take who he could get. Now, this is what's going to happen. Listen, show. It's okay, Hizashi. Aizawa cut him off, knowing his best friend would apologize at the first moment he was free. I said something, and of course you were going to be told to ask questions. I don't want Midoriya to hate me, he replied. Aizawa watched as people avoided him, though the bond kept a reassuring pulse of determination that wasn't his own. He doesn't hate you. In fact, he wants to stay friends with you. I don't know why before you ask me. Aizawa added, a small smile on his face as he watched Uraraka and Hatsum join him. Would you tell the world he was yours? Yamada asked quietly. It was times like this when Aizawa knew when his best friend said, present Mike is different from Hizashi. During moments where he was supposed to be present Mike, a fun and loud guy, there were moments where the mask slipped and the sad thought of Yamada was heard. I would, though once they figure out he's quirkless, people might think he was only let into my class because of me, Aizawa responded, watching as he approached Tokyoami. Then they ran to a corner to strategize away from everyone else. Do you think he's planned for this? Absolutely. And time's up. The battle begins shortly. Midnight called, stretching her arms. I'm going to love this punishment. The crowd roared with cheers as the board now switched from being a clock to a countdown. Midoriya was the rider. He wasn't strong, but he could be quick, plus he needed higher ground to observe and strategize. People were leaning towards Midoriya. They were going after him first. Go. In an instant people were after Midoriya like a bull chasing a red cape, but he planned for this. Not even giving us a chance to think, such is the fate of the persuade. Tokoyami said. Dark Shadow nodded his head in agreement. Make your choice, Midoriya. What are we doing? We're running away. He had planned for this. They could attack, but he wanted to save energy for later. Dark Shadow, hide for now please. He whispered. The spirit nodded and hid in their shadow. It made it easier for Tokoyami to conserve energy too. No, you're not. Tetsu shouted. The guy in front activated his quirk, causing them to sink in the ground. What's happening? Uraraka called. As their legs sank, Midoriya was trying to study the other classes more than 1B, but he had forgotten about this quirk. Watch your faces, Midoriya said, pressing a button to activate the jetpack he was wearing, thanks to Hatsum of course. They flew? Dimen support course. Tetsu shouted. Midoriya had no clue how to steer it, but as long as this kept them steady he was fine being in the air. Suddenly, Dark Shadow flew out and swiped at the air. Jiro was trying to use her quirk on them, but he caught it. Thanks, Dark Shadow. Midoriya called out, looking around the arena. You're just what we need to cover the omnidirectional blind spots we have. You are the one who chose me, Tokoyami replied, though he was preening at the compliment inside. We're landing. Uraraka called. Hatsum activated her boots that kept them hovering for a few moments before they landed on solid ground. Your quirk is amazing. Midoriya called. She was making everything but the equipment and herself float. Once they hit the ground they continued to run. Dark Shadow was once again in the shadow of the group, but his head was poking out, almost like a land shark. So, what did you think of my babies? Cuteness can be manufactured, you know. Hatsum shouted. Midoriya nodded. They have excellent mobility, Hatsum. Your babies are amazing. He responded, missing Uraraka's bitter comment about how she was making them float. This is too easy. This isn't even a fight, it's a massacre. Mineta shouted. Midoriya's head snapped towards the direction of his voice. It was coming from Shoji? Is that even allowed? Midoriya called out, instantly recognizing how Shoji's arms were folded up to hide something or someone. Judges say yes. Midnight called in response. He groaned, then looked over to see another group running towards them. We need more breathing room. Tokoyami called. Midoriya ducked the minute he saw Azui's tongue fly out for his headband. Quick and observant as usually, Midoriya, she complimented. He flashed a smile back before studying the groups after him. They have Azui with them too? He called. Uraraka lifted her foot only to notice she was stuck. And we're stuck on Mineta's quirk? I told you to call me Tsu. Azui shouted. A flurry of grape ball were thrown as Azui was trying to attack the headband. We need to leave now. Tokoyami shouted. Midoriya pressed the button once more and they flew straight up against the cries of Hatsum. My baby is broken. She cried. Midoriya kept his gaze down, trying to watch the battle from above. Sorry, but we got away. He replied, only to hear a loud explosion from the ground. He knew the sound and it gave him instant anxiety. At once he felt Aizawa calming him, his soulmate aware of the fear he possessed because of Bakugo. Faint quirkless Deku, don't think for a minute you're safe. Bakugo shouted. Midoriya drowned out the audience who was now murmuring, confused at the statement. In a last-minute move he brought his hand up, trying to push him away, but instead he grabbed his headband and Dark Shadow acted as a shield for his quirk. Midoriya not only has the chart-topping band but now he took Team Bakugo's. Present Mike shouted. Midoriya looked down to see that he had indeed taken his headband out of sheer luck once again. Good job, Midoriya. Uraraka cheered as they landed, but I can't land anymore with only one boot. She's right, we can't risk taking to the skies again, we only have one choice and that's to survive on the ground. He tied the band around his neck, the feeling almost heavy. In an attempt to stop him from taking my band, I grabbed his instead. It's been 7 minutes, let's see how the teams rank. Yamada called. Instantly the roaring audience was now silent. It seems like Team Midoriya is the only group from Class 1A with points. Well, Midoriya became aware of the team running next to everyone who was in a state of shock. The boy only smirked as he tied another band around his neck. Midnight said the obstacle course was just the first game, so I figured a group that large wouldn't stay either. An estimate of 40 or so students would make it to the next round. He turned and smirked at the team he stole the band from. So Class 1B watched as you used your quirks while he learned what your weaknesses were. Did all of Class 1B do this? Uraraka asked. Midoriya couldn't answer, as he felt all eyes on him. Class 1B watched and waited, but there is one person who has yet to use their quirk. Monoma stared at Midoriya, who was watching his surroundings all while being acutely aware of the many eyes watching him. And we are excited to see what the wait is for. It looks like Class 1B is declaring war on Class 1A. Present Mike shouted. Midoriya ducked his head as another hand reached out for his band. Come on Midoriya, show the world that you aren't quirkless. Monoma shouted, expecting him to suddenly rage like his classmate, but instead he only lowered himself, a smirk present on his face. And so what if I am? He called out. The audience grew quiet, but he didn't care. But the waves of pride he felt from the bond made the reveal worth it. Notes. So I have about 5 fics, including this, that will switch to a daily update schedule. If I go a day without posting, worry not. It's because I maybe didn't write the chapter or I didn't post because I had worked. This chapter was late because of that. Please remember I will not abandon this FIC, and the McDeku and the Eraser Decamike FIC are underway. The McDeku FIC will come out before the Eraser Decamike. Thanks guys. Chapter 22. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. The crowd was quiet, even the teams had stopped talking and moving and just watched Midoriya. He's quirkless? Someone from 1B shouted, but some of his classmates want to both protect Midoriya and beat 1B held him in this case. Midoriya, use your quirk already, show 1B we are manly. Kirishima shouted, it was a smart idea. He gave the impression that he was quirkless, but if his classmates hyped him up enough, they could paint the target on his back while keeping 1A looking strong. Kirishima, it's too dangerous. He replied. The game was now in starting once again. The occasional shouts from 1A towards Midoriya only made 1B annoyed that he wasn't like them, that he wasn't easily angered, that is unless you knew what made him angry. And calling a kid quirkless after society has beaten them to a pulp is nothing. Eraser, could you give us insight as to what Midoriya's secret power could be? It seems like everyone is confused. Is he really quirkless? Present Mike had to ask the questions, keep the game moving, though it made him sad to ask if Midoriya had a quirk. He cut himself off. He could like and say that he was and risk getting him disqualified by the angry crowd if people find out. Keep watching. Looks like even Eraser wants to keep this a surprise. Yamada shouted, silently thanking his best friend. Come on Midoriya, show us your flashy quirk that landed you in the hero class. Monoma shouted. He was fairly annoyed that he couldn't get Midoriya to use his quirk. Why show a quirk when I can use my skills to get me by? He responded, ducking under another hand that was reaching out for his band. Midoriya, this time it was Todoroki, and the other teams were at a standstill, ready to move when they saw the opening. Todoroki, he said simply, ducking under Tsu's tongue once again. No hard feelings? He asked. The bicolored boy didn't want to lose one of his friends. No hard feelings, Midoriya replied simply. He looked down at his other classmates too and nodded. Then I will be taking that now, Todoroki said simply. Midoriya placed his hand on his head just to make sure the band was there before tightening it. Well, I didn't think this confrontation would happen until later in the contest, Tokoyami said. Midoriya only nodded, then waited for their first move. Now Ida, forward. Todoroki said. Ida responded, then started to run towards them. Midoriya kept his team where they were. He needed to see what they would do, and as long as the top team, in terms of quirks, was after him, the others would try to go after Monoma. Yaoyorozu, be ready to protect us? He shouted. Midoriya watched as a long blade formed on her arm, but something else was being formed. It looked like we have to get out of here now. Midoriya shouted, knowing what was going to happen next. He heard Kaminari talking about it after USJ, how Yaomomo used a blanket to protect her and Jiro from Kaminari's electricity. What's happening? Uraraka asked. Midoriya sent a look of pity at Dark Shadow. Dark Shadow, I think you need to protect us, Midoriya responded. The spirit nuzzled him before standing guard. Kaminari dashed. Oh, I know what I gotta do, he replied, feeling his quirk start to build. Watching our surroundings, Midoriya muttered as he ducked once again, then slapped away another arm. Now that they were moving, people were attacking more. Hope you made something strong, Yaoyorozu, Kaminari started. Midoriya watched. They pulled a blanket around the rest of their group. Indiscriminate shock. 1.3 million volts. Suddenly the teams around them were being stunned, then Dark Shadow flew up and protected them from the electricity. He cried out in pain but stayed there until it was done, Then Todoroki used the sharp weapon Yaoyorozu made and started to freeze the ground behind him. Todoroki just took out half the competition. Present Mike shouted. Aizawa was just speechless, watching Midoriya hold the shadow spirit before it melted away into the group's shadow. Monoma. Some in Class 1B shouted the boy was snarking off at Bakugo again, taking his frustrations out on him. Tell me, is that boy Midoriya, is he really quirkless? He asked, though Bakugo didn't answer. He was too set off to say anything. He isn't Dash. How sad would it be if the great Class 1A of the heroics department had a quirkless student in their midst? That's practically saying anyone can be a hero, and that's not the case. Midoriya had to steel himself because it was true that you needed a quirk to be a hero, but that's why he was there. Monoma was desperate at this point. The second round is practically over and Class 1A was still in the lead, and yet Midoriya's quirk hasn't been used yet. I think I've figured out who Aizawa, Sensei's soulmate is. Monoma shouted. Most of Class 1A froze, including Midoriya. Midoriya, do you have something to say? If you're trying to get me to use my quirk, it won't happen, he replied, still running from Todoroki. And I won't tell you who Aizawa, Sensei's soulmate is. I promised him I wouldn't say. So it isn't you, the quirkless hero of 1A? Monoma asked. The crowd went silent, even Todoroki's team stopped running. If I'm quirkless, why would I be in the heroics department? He asked. Dark Shadow once again came back from the shadow, feeling better now. No one wants a quirkless soulmate, so why would a pro want one too? Monoma didn't know what to say. He was right, a pro would only be weighed down by a quirkless. Thanks for the points, and your observation ability is good. Midoriya ran by him, snatching a few bands. But it's not as good as mine. Monoma was annoyed before but said now. In Class 1B he was regarded to have high observational ability, but if this Class 1A student thinks he has a better observational ability, then he's dead wrong. It seems like Team Midoriya has secured his spot in. Look at Team Todoroki. It looks like they have one final attack planned. Present Mike shouted. Midoriya turned around a bit too late. He felt the band get snatched from his forehead, even a few of his neck. No! He shouted. They were going to lose. And they didn't have enough time to plan another attack. We need those points. Let's go, Midoriya. Uraraka shouted. Suddenly the team lurched forward and their goal, now like everyone else, was for the 1 million point headband. Todoroki brought his arms up, his left arm ablaze while the other gripped a headband he had yet to put on. I will get burned if I do this, but I have no choice, he thought, grabbing Todoroki's arm and held it while lunging and grabbing a headband. Then the team pulled away. The scent of burning flesh rose and stung everyone's noses except Midoriya, who was all too familiar with the smell. Midoriya, maybe I got something in my eyes, but Midoriya looked down to see a 70-point headband. No, this isn't enough to bring us back. He looked at the scoreboard, and paired with the single band around his neck, they were in 6th place. It looks like Team Midoriya didn't get the 1 million point headband, and with only 10 seconds left, what will they do? Present Mike shouted. Aizawa was sitting on the edge of his seat, but yet he knew somehow Midoriya would pull through and would win. Come on, Aizawa muttered, just get a higher band. Midoriya smiled to himself. He could feel the pride from Aizawa. He knew this was no longer just about Aizawa but now helping his friends who had a goal of their own. Tokoyami! Midoriya shouted. Dark Shadow lunged towards Todoroki as he shouted for Kaminari to use his electricity. Dark Shadow yelped but lunged again before pulling away. He hid in the shadows, seemingly empty-handed. One last time. Midoriya shouted. The group ran forward as Bakugo emerged from the ice shouting and running towards Todoroki. In a last-minute move, Bakugo shot himself off the team and flew to Todoroki. But the buzzer ran out. Midoriya's stomach sank as Present Mike called the winning teams. Maybe everyone was right, maybe you need a quirk to fight in this world. Midoriya, Uraraka said as she walked over. Hatsum took the jetpack off his back then smiled widely. We finished. But we did. Midoriya was cut off by the large grins Hatsum and Uraraka wore. He looked back at Tokoyami who was smiling. If it wasn't for your distraction, Dark Shadow wouldn't have been able to get another band. We were aiming for the 1 million headband, but this is just enough to secure a spot, he explained. With tears in his eyes he watched as the board changed. And in 4th place, Team Midoriya? How did they dash? Aizawa had stood up suddenly. He could feel the anxiety Midoriya once held melt away into pride. He watched as Midoriya turned his head and looked up at the box where Aizawa and Yamada were commentating. He was looking to see if his soulmate was watching. Shoyuta, your soulmate has too much dumb luck, Yamada explained. This was their time for a break while Cementos made the new field for the one-on-one fights. And skill, he added. It was hard to ignore his ability to observe when he points things out that you wouldn't expect him to say or find out about. And skill, Yamada echoed. Where are you guys meeting up? The door burst open to reveal a very exhausted and yet very happy Midoriya. He coughed, unable to catch his breath. I did it? You did it, Aizawa agreed. Midoriya took a few steps before crashing into his soulmate's arms, neither one caring how sweaty Midoriya was. I will get us something to eat, Yamada suddenly said, leaving the room and closing the door behind him. Do you think people know I'm quirkless yet? Midoriya asked Aizawa to press a kiss to his mess of curls. Some might. A lot of people think a quirkless student couldn't be in 1A, so it's unlikely, Aizawa replied. A large smile grew on Midoriya's face. Perfect, was all he said before cuddling up to Aizawa, pressing kisses to his face and neck. Were you watching me? Every second. Were you proud? Every moment. Aizawa pecked his lips, then pulled him into his lap, Midoriya practically straddling him. Though his limbs were hanging off, made him look more like a sloth clinging to someone. Can I sleep? Midoriya asked. Aizawa only adjusted his grip, making sure he didn't hit the brace. Is your back okay? Aizawa asked instead. He nodded, then buried his head into his neck. Painkillers, really strong ones? Was all he said before his breathing evened out. Just a few-minute nap. You have to eat soon. Midoriya only grunted slightly, falling into a deep sleep. Hey, the line was Pret dash. Yamada opened the door to see Aizawa looking at his phone and Midoriya asleep. He's asleep. How much time until the break is over? Aizawa asked Yamada, closed the door quickly, then set the bentos on the chair. About 20 minutes, he said, then picked them up and watched as Aizawa shifted Midoriya. You need to wake up, he said. Midoriya only huffed, blowing hot air into Aizawa's neck. Dawana, comfy? He whined. Aizawa only rolled his eyes when he saw Yamada recording. Hizashi got food, he added. Midoriya stopped shifting around, then lifted his head. Zashi has food? He slurred, and at that moment he has never wanted to kill Yamada more. That's Yamada to dash. Midoriya, you can call me Zashi if I can call you Aizu? Okay Zashi. He yawned, then turned around in Aizawa's lap, unaware of the jealous rage he has unleashed on Yamada. Here dash, he snickered, still recording. Here Aizu, it's a bento. The teen rubbed his eyes, then grabbed the bento with his bad hand, hissing at the pain. What did you do to your hand? Aizawa asked, looking at Midoriya's palm. Yamada stopped recording to look at it. I grabbed Todoroki's arm to grab a headband. He was soberer now, opening the lunchbox to see what was inside while Aizawa and Yamada inspected the burn. I will get Recov dash. Don't, her quirk uses my stamina to heal. I just need burn cream and a bandage. These aren't my first burns, Midoriya said, fully awake and now a bit panicked. Yamada looked at Aizawa, who only nodded, his soft gaze making it hard to say no to the boy. Okay, I will be back in a bit. With that he left and closed the door, leaving Aizawa and Midoriya. I'm hungry, he muttered, picking up the chopsticks, then started to eat the bento. Zoe, you should dash. How come you don't address me by my first name and yet you do it with Yamada so easily? Aizawa asked. He was far from over the topic. Well, his voice trailed off. He swallowed the bit of rice he had in his mouth, then responded. He's more like a friend and you're my soulmate, so it's a bit more embarrassing. Can I call you by your first name? Aizawa asked, enjoying how red Midoriya's face got. If you want, he replied. Aizawa pressed a kiss to his forehead. Okay Izuku. Midoriya let out a noise of embarrassment and shocked. He didn't think Aizawa would do it so quickly. Izuku. Aizawa pressed another kiss to his face. Izuku dash, another kiss, Izuku. He pressed a firm kiss against his lips, enjoying how embarrassed Midoriya was. Shoulda. He managed to stutter out, and oh, did it make Aizawa angry they weren't in a private room together. I'm the only one you should be on first-name basis with. He was jealous, and Midoriya couldn't say he didn't like how possessive Aizawa was over him. Or friends get nicknames but not full name? He asked. Aizawa stared at him before nodding. Fine, he replied, letting Midoriya eat once again. Midoriya would be lying if he said he didn't have plans to make Aizawa even more jealous in the future, but for now, it was time to eat and relax with him. Notes. Hi, I hate to say but trying to edit fix and posting this daily makes it hard to give it full attention. So I need a few days again to build up chapters and edit stuff for this FIC. Thank you so much for reading. I will be back on the 18th. Chapter 23. Hey guys. No, this story isn't dead. I just needed a few days to take a breather and work on a few other fics while building this up without the pressure of updating. That being said, I have the final results to the poll I had you guys take. Chapters. There will be 50+ chapters with all arcs in the anime. No manga because spoilers. Ideas for one-shots. I can't wait to post a one-shot series. I will be using almost all those ideas as a running start, then I will have a suggestions box of sorts for more. Will there be an Eraser Decamic FIC? It was an overwhelming want from you guys to write a FIC for them. Ask and you shall receive, smiley face. Eraser Decamic U. It will be a combo between Quirkless Midoriya and the Soulmate O, where you write on your skin to talk to your soulmates. The other ideas will become small one-shot series, maybe a few chapters, but I still want to give them book time. Ideas for one-shots. Like before, I will be posting one-shots and these ideas will be used. If any fit the storyline, I will add it in. Thank you guys for voting. I will be back with the new update tomorrow. I can't wait for you to read it. Chapter 24. Notes. Imbai. By the time he finished eating, Yamada had returned with the burn cream and a bandage. Hold your hand out please, he muttered. Midoriya looked back at Aizawa, who nodded and sent him a glare, as if telling him, you better do this. Midoriya groaned as he snatched the burn cream out of Yamada's hand, plastered it on, then rolled the bandage around. The burns still hurt, his nerves were damaged but not totally, yet it was a habit now. No one sees the burns and no one cares. But this time it was different and Midoriya didn't know how to feel about this kind of difference. Well, okay, it looks like you have it covered. Yamada chuckled, but the amusement was lacking in his voice. When did you dash? Zawa can tell you. Off to stretch. Bye. He rushed out, pecking Aizawa's lips quickly, then raced out of the room, accidentally slamming it behind him. Show Yuta, what's he talking about? Yamada shakily asked. His mind was connecting the dots slowly, but the more he thought about it, the more it stung. A classmate has been bullying him since he was a kid, he replied simply. The words held a bitter taste in his mouth. Yamada's mouth dropped open. He tried to speak but no words came out. How bad? He felt the need to ask, but by the way Aizawa looked at him, he just knew how bad it was. Who is it? Bakugo Katsuki, explosion quirk. He's used it against Midoriya. His sentences were choppy, as if speaking about the boy would make the situation worse. Why haven't you told Nedu? Sending him out there with Midoriya is dashed. He cut himself off when he saw the glare Aizawa shot at him. I couldn't, at least not then. Midoriya practically begged me to let him stay longer. I can't tell if it's out of irrational fear or the need to see everyone succeed, Aizawa muttered, watching the classes walk back out to the field then as the judges got in place. What will you do then? Yamada asked, removing his glasses to wipe them down and place them back on the bridge of his nose. Once this is over and Midoriya has proved himself, I will tell Nedu. Prove himself to who? Yamada didn't want to think Aizawa was testing his soulmate, and yet, it seemed so like him. The world, that you don't need a quirk to be a hero. Where were you? Uraraka asked Midoriya as they walked onto the field again. He smiled sheepishly and pointed towards the box. Were you eating lunch with Dash? Not so loud. He hissed, slamming his hand over her mouth, then lifted his head, looking to see who was around him. It was at that moment that Monoma looked at him and shot him a knowing smile. Midoriya didn't care who found out, but the way he looked at him was almost taunting. The group split, most returning to their given seats. Luckily that included Monoma, who smiled once again at Midoriya and waved. That's creepy, Uraraka said, though her mouth was muffled. Midoriya pulled his hand away and nodded. I think he knows about my bond to Shoyuta, he said, saying his name was easier than he thought, but the little experiment only made Uraraka squeal loudly. You guys are on a first-name basis now? She asked wildly. He nodded, rubbing the back of his neck with his good hand. Todoroki approached them, Ida not too far behind him, and bowed slightly. "I'm sorry I took it too far," he said, then lifted his head only to see Midoriya extremely flustered. That's okay, there are no hard feelings, remember?" He frantically waved his hands. Todoroki, in turn, placed his hand on Midoriya's back and froze the brace, then on his bandages. "Ask me if you need me to cool you down again," he replied. Midoriya nodded, then smiled coyly. "Are you and Ida bonded?" he asked aloud. Ida's face was stricken red while Todoroki had a pale blush. "We are. Is there an issue?" Todoroki replied bluntly. Ida, on the other hand, was so red Midoriya thought he could burst. "No, just curious is all." He wasn't lying, in fact, he was very curious, yes, over their bond, but about the fact that Ida had confessed to him not even a week ago. Why did he confess when he was bonded to Todoroki? Ida seemed to understand the puzzled look and sighed, motioning for him to follow and pull away from the rest of the group. "Ida, did you dash?" "I didn't tell him I tried to pursue you." He cut him off promptly, holding his hand up. "I couldn't let him find out that I had feelings for you, though they still linger at times. I think it was more misplaced than real." A smile grew on Midoriya's face, letting out a sigh of relief. "Tell him, if not for you, do it for me. A bond shouldn't have lies. Even now I struggle to tell Shoyuta more of my past, but with something as easy as a confession with misplaced feelings, he may be a bit hurt, but it's better than the position I am in now," Midoriya explained. Ida's brows furrowed in confusion. They had a healthy bond, so what gives? "What's happening?" Ida asked. Midoriya glanced over his shoulder, surveying the area, then turned to see his worried best friend. I have a complicated past and as caring and loving as Shoyuta can be." "What's so funny?" Midoriya stopped talking when Ida started to chuckle. "I'm sorry, that was incredibly rude of me, but calling our teacher caring and loving, I never thought I would hear that," he explained. Midoriya joined him in a chorus of giggles. "I guess you're right, it's hard to image Shoyuta to be so cuddly, but never let him find out I told you this." He leaned in, cupping his mouth with his left hand. "He's more affectionate than Uraraka." "Really?" Their gazes shifted to the box where Aizawa was lazily talking to Yamada. "I never would have guessed." "I assume Todoroki is the same way?" Midoriya asked. Ida nodded, his face turning a medium shade of red. "The bond is still new, only a week into it. I guess that's why I wanted to know if your bond was permanent more than asking because I wanted to date you," Ida explained, rubbing the back of his neck, letting his hand linger a bit longer before it fell to his side. "But Todoroki is very cuddly, he won't ask either usually." Ida was cut off when a pair of arms wrapped around his waist, a tuft of white and red hair seen as he adjusted his hands. Todoroki then buried his face in Ida's neck, clearly enjoying the comfort. "My supposed father is here," was all he said. Ida turned his head around to see Endeavor standing on the top of the stairs, staring down at the pair. With no clue as to where the sudden confidence came from, Ida turned his body, wrapping his arm around Todoroki while the other held Todoroki's head, his fingers threaded throughout his hair. Ida glared upward. He was almost challenging the number 2 hero, calling his bluff essentially. Yamada had shouted over the PA system at the sudden revelation, though the trio ignored it as Midoriya too was glaring up at him, his fists balled. He knew Todoroki, and if he was to show this much affection in a stadium this big, there had to be a reason. Endeavor huffed, turning around, then walked back inside, now out of view of the pair glaring at him. What was that? Midoriya and Ida from Class 1A suddenly having a silent showdown, and Endeavor backed out. Yamada called. Some cheers were heard when Endeavor was said to have lost the match. Even Yamada sounded ecstatic. Todoroki shifted, able to look up at Ida, and smiled softly. It was an obviously private smile, so Midoriya knew to back away and head back to the rest of the group. Though what he saw next kinda made it worth the semi-guilty feeling he had. Ida smiled in return, pressing a kiss gently to Todoroki's forehead, as if the small kiss would make Todoroki shatter. The crowd went crazy, an essential power couple in Class 1A where one protected the other from a seemingly ruthless hero, then held a gaze softer than cloud. It was a movie-worthy moment, and Midoriya was thankful he didn't turn around. "It looks like we have answers, folks. Ida and Todoroki from Class 1A are a bonded pair." This made the audience roar with applause and shouts of joy. 2 bonded pairs within Class 1A, though one was still lurking in the shadows compared to the spotlight cast upon the new pair. As great as this moment is, it's time to announce the final punishment of the tournament. Midnight shouted, raising her flail into the air. The audience roared even louder, almost deafening. Though in this moment everything was quiet, as Midoriya lifted his head and smiled at Aizawa, both wishing they were Todoroki and Ida right now, able to hold the other and now receive judgment. It was one thing for the audience to support the relationship when only a few clues were given. It was another when Aizawa and Midoriya were embracing as Todoroki and Ida were. I withdraw. Ojiro shakily rose his hand into the air. Gasps were heard around him. I don't remember much, only a little dash. Why would he withdraw? Midoriya thought. The world around him went quiet as he started to think more and more, the puzzle growing ever more complicated. Who was in his cavalry group? When another pulled out, Midoriya crossed him off too. His world was silent as he ran through who it could be. Lifting his head, he made eye contact with a purple-haired boy who looked too satisfied to now be a part of this suspect list. Name? Unknown. Quirk? Unknown. Class? 1C. He went through the list in his head, though with the fact that 2 of the 4 people in the group had no recollection of what had happened, it made his mind run rampant with ideas, before settling down on something that seemed to fit the bill. Could he be taking over their mind, almost like a puppeteer? Shinso waved to Midoriya before walking over to his Class 1B friends and talked to them. The 2 walked back to their seats while 2 others were called down to join them. Midoriya couldn't focus on the world around him. He was so caught up in his world that he didn't hear the pairs get selected. He didn't hear the nervous chatter around them. Midoriya, Uraraka shook him a bit, then pointed to the board. Look. He swallowed, his brows furrowed in confusion and a bit of fear. Already he was facing off with someone he had little idea as to how their quirk worked. There on the board was the first obstacle to the final round. Shinso. Chapter 25. Show calm down, Yamada hissed. He had turned the mic off for a few while the crowd was talking about the pairings. The classes had started to walk back to their seats, leaving the first round contestants standing, Midoriya and Shinso. It's not my anxiety, Hisashi, it's Midoriya's. He rolled his eyes, trying to reassure Midoriya through the bond. You can talk to him in a few, Yamada whispered, pressing the button on the mic. What a shocking turn of events for this year's tournament. Let's take a moment to press pause on the show and bring you some side games. Yamada turned the mic off, then turned towards Aizawa, who was already out of his seat. You have 30 minutes while the games are going on. There's a 5-minute warning before it ends if you don't want to be discovered. Make it back here before the 5-minute warning is heard. Aizawa finished, then bolted out of the room. They assigned waiting rooms during the break, so finding his soulmate was not as hard as it seemed. What was hard was trying to keep his cool as he walked down to the area. He didn't want any followers, as fighting in the first round was already nerve-wracking enough, but having your soulmate announced to the world was even worse. When he made it to the hallway where the students were waiting for the 5-minute call, he stopped, taking a deep breath, then walked down the hall as if he didn't care. Stopping when Uraraka and Sayu were walking hand in hand down the hall. Aizawa-sensei, what are you doing here? Sayu asked, tilting her head to the side. Uraraka elbowed her gently, then smiled. Finally, Midoriya is sick and recovery girl isn't coming. He could tell Uraraka was lying. It was very obvious to him, and yet she was giving him an excuse to be alone with him. Thanks for calling me. What room? He asked lazily, though his heart was racing. Room 3. Ojiro is talking to him right now. She smiled, then pulled Sayu into her room, promptly closing and locking the door. He approached the door, knocking gently. It swung back to reveal Midoriya, who was smiling up at his soulmate, then Ojiro, who clearly looked embarrassed. I can leave for a bit. I hope the information helped Midoriya, Ojiro stuttered out. He walked out swiftly, keeping his tail close as he did. Aizawa walked in. The minute the door was closed and locked, Aizawa swept Midoriya off his feet. In turn, Midoriya let his shoes fall to the ground and he wrapped his feet around his hips, his arms around his neck, essentially a koala bear. I'm proud of you, Aizawa said simply, though he hadn't started the 3rd round. He wanted to let Midoriya know he was so proud of him. I can feel it, he stuttered. Midoriya pulled his head away from his shoulder to look Aizawa in the eyes, content with just taking his features in. Instead, Aizawa pressed kisses gently to his face, making the teen giggle. Shoulda dash. Say my name again. Aizawa stopped pressing kisses to his face and instead walked over to the bed, sitting down though Midoriya was still clinging to him like a koala bear. Shoulda dash. Aizawa pressed a kiss to his forehead. Shoyuda dash, one to the tip of his nose. Shoyuda. This time Midoriya was cut off by Aizawa, pressing his lips firmly against Midoriya. Midoriya broke the kiss. As it lingered for a few seconds though he was in the mood to talk rather than kiss, the cuddles were nice. Something wrong? Aizawa asked Midoriya to shake his head, content resting their forehead together. I just want to sit like this for a while. He should be planning how to get past Todoroki, but he knows there's something more important he has to do rather than winning the match he needs to save him. After all, it was Midoriya who saved himself his entire life and even then it grew tiring. He couldn't imagine what it could be like to essentially never save yourself. Growing bored of me already? Aizawa joked though the flash of pain he felt in the bond said otherwise. Midoriya opened his eyes and pressed a quick kiss to his lips. Never, just thinking about my matches. He responded, stretching his arms then letting them drape over his neck once again. I don't think I can get past Todoroki. Where's that pro-hero attitude you had earlier? Aizawa asked, slightly worried, though Midoriya was still staying positive. That's just it. Todoroki can't even face his father at times, which only means something is wrong. He won't even use his fire consciously. I plan to fix it. He replied, aware of the numbing sensation he felt under and around the new burn. Besides, someone who has gotten burned most of their life makes the perfect rescuer. Don't sabotage your chance, Dash. It's okay. If I didn't stop here I would have to face Kaken and I don't think I can do that just yet. He added softly, that only made Aizawa's heart tug. They sat in silence once again, sharing small kisses occasionally, though it was Midoriya who broke the silence. Are we not going to talk about the fact that I can feel your emotions and you mine? He asked. Aizawa chuckled, pulling away slightly. I didn't think you would want to talk about it today, shelving it for another day. He repeated like Midoriya has said seemingly a million times, though it was sarcastic it only made Midoriya giggle. We have time, let's talk. He started and pulled back to face his faded better. Why can we feel each other's emotions so early on? I thought you had an idea, Aizawa replied. He was very much confused and expected his very smart soulmate to have an idea. Midoriya shrugged his shoulders, fidgeting with his fingers. I have a thought, though it seems silly, he started, but the small kiss they shared held more emotions than either could describe. What if it's because I trusted you with my darkest secret and you trusted me with information about a previous idea to bond to Yamada if you didn't have a soulmate? I have a lot of secrets. There isn't any way for me to comfortably tell you them all in one go. Even the one I told you wasn't the full truth. I kept things out, a lot of things. But even then, we got this ability now, after we accepted the other for our secrets and more to come. Most people, regardless if they are soulmates, do that. He rambled on. Aizawa only smiled and nodded, proud of his soulmate. You have a point. There isn't anything else that could explain why we can feel the other's emotion. Speaking of dashed, he sighed deeply as if exhausted. We need to do something about your anxiety. Midoriya was confused. He knew he had bad anxiety, but it took a lot to throw him over the edge in terms of pure fear. Your anxiety over the first round was almost enough to give me a panic attack, Aizawa deadpanned, though it made Midoriya turn away, bowing his head slightly. Sorry, he muttered. Never did he think his anxiety would hurt his soulmate. Maybe if he wasn't so damaged, if he wasn't so stupid, Aizawa wouldn't have gotten hurt. Why can't he be a good soulmate? Stop thinking, Izuku. The breaking voice was enough to stop Midoriya's heart. What goes on in your head? Everything and nothing at once, he replied simply, tears brimming both soulmates' eyes. Aizawa chuckled, whipping Midoriya's tears as they fell. I'm dashed. It's okay, after all that you've been through. It's expected that you have stronger emotions, negative ones at that, until you can properly heal. But just do me a favor and don't have a panic attack. I think that might actually give me a heart attack. You're not that old, Midoriya shot back, a playful smile tugging at his lips. Aizawa, in turn, fell back, keeping Midoriya steady. I stand corrected, old man. Old man? What does that make you then, a student dating an old man? Sugar baby? Aizawa's heart couldn't take any more of Midoriya's comments for the day, much less the week. Izuku, he muttered, holding the teen close, the things you do to me. Care to explain, sensei? He asked, his tone teasing and light, well aware of the mess he's slowly leaving Aizawa's mind in. I can't, not here, at least not with this much time left. The clock on the wall proved to be the biggest PP block of them all. Then at your house? Midoriya asked innocently, his chin resting on Aizawa's chest. This boy knew what he was doing to his soulmate, and it was obvious. As obvious as Aizawa's frustration, obviously. Date first, he said simply. To complete the bond was supposed to be a momentous occasion, and at the rate they were going, well, the bond could be complete at the end of the week. Date? Midoriya's head perked up, excited at the prospect. Aizawa chuckled, running a hand through Midoriya's messy curls, his palm stopping towards his ear. Though Midoriya wasn't having it, he wanted the attention more. He nuzzled his cheek into his hand, eyes closed, and clearly enjoying it. I want to take you out first, Aizawa muttered, returning his hand to Midoriya's curls. As much as he was enjoying the nuzzles, it was getting harder and hard to resist. Okay, he agreed, burying his face back into Aizawa's neck. Nap? You have 15 minutes until the first match, Aizawa started, though with how cute Midoriya looked he couldn't say no. You have 10 minutes, I have to leave before the 5-minute mark. Deal? With it he pressed another kiss to his soulmate, though on the neck instead of his face, then fell asleep with a small sigh. Chapter 26. Notes. Surprise double update. There will be another one tomorrow morning, afternoon. Come on, Aizawa muttered, shaking his half-asleep soulmate awake. Midoriya only grumbled, then lifted his head to stare up at Aizawa. Wake up! Wake up! Aizawa echoed, wishing he had his phone nearby to take a picture of his rather adorable half-asleep soulmate. With a sigh, Midoriya rolled off Aizawa and onto the bed, then onto the floor on accident. A warm chuckle escaped Aizawa as Midoriya pouted, then started to giggle at this. Ow! He called through. Aizawa found it funnier to get up, stretch, then walked past him. Midoriya rolled onto his stomach and stared at Aizawa, who pointed to the clock. 6 minutes. Ugh, you don't care if I get hurt? I do, you just didn't get hurt that much. Aizawa shot back. Midoriya picked his shoes up and then slid them on carefully as his back was slowly regaining the pain he had suppressed for the past few hours. Painkillers? Midoriya called out, looking through his bag. Aizawa tossed him the bottle. He grabbed it out of the air as if it was nothing. Thanks, Sho. He popped 2 pills and swallowed dry, then tossed the bottle back to Aizawa. Ready? Aizawa asked. Midoriya nodded and opened the door, revealing Minoma, who was leaning against the wall with a smile. Knew it, was all he said before walking away, leaving Midoriya in shock. He took a deep breath and then started to walk the other way to the field. Aren't you worried people will find out? Aizawa asked, his voice steady, though Midoriya could feel the bits of panic coming through the bond. I made it this far. If he decides to tell, then that's fine. I'm not giving up, but pushing through what's to come. If there was anything he was good at, it would be pushing through tough situations like this, as life will always get hard, and he had no time to waste sitting there stuck at a problem. Okay, was all Aizawa said. They walked side by side, though both parties were tempted to grab the other's hand as anxiety was rising in both. When they stopped a good distance away from the entrance to the field, Aizawa turned to Midoriya. Whatever happens out there, know I'm proud you made it this far, he said simply, pressing a kiss to his forehead. Wait for the buzzer to go off, I will be in the booth. With that, Aizawa walked back, not bothering to turn back and wave. Instead, he opted to raise his hand and kept walking. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Sports Festival Tournament. The first track is about to play. Who will be our chart topper this round? Yamada called. The buzzer went off next to Midoriya. Taking a deep breath, and he walked out, his face stricken with determination and fear, though the audience didn't mind. The first to enter is none other than the wild card during the first 2 rounds. Midoriya Izuku from the Hero Course, Class 1A. Yamada cheered. He felt immense pride for his soulmate's soulmate, as well as his new friend. His competitor is none other than the mysterious Shinso Hitoshi from General Studies, Class 1C. The crowd didn't roar as loud for Shinso as they did Midoriya, though it may be because of the lack of spotlight on him throughout the round, or rather he was from General Studies and it was hard to shed that title. The duo stopped at the top of the stairs, endearing the arena, then bowed, showing their respect to the other, though Shinso couldn't care less. Match begins. Midnight raised her flail in the air. The crowd went silent as Midoriya approached Shinso. Midoriya, right, how did you end up in the hero course again? Shinso asked. Midoriya almost replied, but he shook it off, clenching his right fist instead. Almost had you there. I bet the kid with a tail told you about my quirk, and yet, I know nothing about yours. Midoriya flashed a smile. It was coy and all-knowing, yet his lips did not dare betray the secrets it held. Shinso in turn smiled, though it more of an annoyance than anything positive. Let's talk about you, Midoriya, Shinso started. Once Midoriya had hit the middle of the field, he stopped walking. Shinso was the one to close the gap, now only standing a few feet from him. You don't have a quirk, do you? You somehow slipped past and made it into the hero course when people like us have worked for the spot you don't defend. What does it feel like to be regarded as a hero, to not be hated? The purple-haired boy was hollering at this point, the passion scene. He cleared his throat then sighed. What do you have to say? I can't speak. If I start now I will lose the first round. Midoriya took a deep breath and then brought his fist up, then swung down heavily, using his full body weight dispersing through the punch. Shinso fell to the ground, clutching his cheek, though his eyes burned with rage and his lips spat fire. You are quirkless. I bet being bound to Aizawa makes it easy to stay in the class. Playing Soulmate dashed. He was cut off by another swift punch. A slap, then his fist shakily rose to deal another, though Midoriya couldn't go through with it. So what if I'm quirkless dash? His body suddenly felt constricted, as if a snake was now wrapping around his body, slowly cutting circulation from the rest of his body. Its fangs were bared, hovering just above his head, and in one motion it clamped down, relinquishing Midoriya of all feeling to his body, and yet his mind was still active. So, you are quirkless, just as Monoma said. Shinso didn't like how he had to ask Monoma for help, but they were both at a loss when it came to his quirk. It was one of the only things they had in common, a similar dislike for Class 1A. Shinso walked around Midoriya, who was standing ramrod straight. Nothing wavered besides the body's natural need for oxygen. Even Aizawa was now numb to his soul mark, the strong bond they shared now empty and void of the emotion he's already gotten used to, and he didn't like this one bit. Turn around and walk out of bounds. Shinso wanted to publicly embarrass him, to show him that you needed a quirk to stay in the game, to stand in the room where it happens. As Midoriya walked, people only chattered, truly confused as to how a quirkless student made it into the hero course. I need to move, Midoriya thought, watching as his body grew closer and closer to the thick white line. His anxiety grew. But what made it even worse was the lack of emotion from Aizawa. It was as if the bond was muted now too, and he hated how alone he felt. In this world, the quirkless don't survive. You're almost a rare breed, so unique and yet no longer wanted. How many people know you don't have a quirk? Does your soulmate even know? Does Aizawa know? The crowd started to murmur even more. The first time it was said was shocking enough, but a second made it hard to ignore. I want to make Shoyuta proud. I need to break out of this. Instead of trying to get his entire body to turn back, he focused his attention on one finger. Come on, Shoyuta is watching. He felt the bond pulse, a steady heartbeat of emotions swirling around, cheering for him. Slowly, he raised a finger up, then dug the nail into his thigh. The pain was enough to wake him up. Without the mind to limit the strength of the human body, Midoriya was easily able to dig the nail deep enough to wake him up, the pain dull and throbbing, but he was awake. How dash! Shinso cut himself off as he watched Midoriya pull the top of his finger out of his thigh, the blood already staining the uniform. Midoriya broke out into a full sprint, having stopped right at the line previously. Shinso kept trying to bark orders but was silenced by a quick punch to the stomach. It was hard to talk when the wind was knocked out of you. Shinso fell to the ground, his knees buckling as he struggled to catch his breath. The crowd went silent once more, watching the new developments occur between the first years who were so different, and yet, Midoriya couldn't stop relating himself to him. Midoriya leaned down, a smirk that was previously etched on his face fell. Shinso was too much like him, but in this position towering over an injured teen, it was too painful to stand where the bully was. Instead, he grabbed Shinso's arm and helped him up, only to lead him towards the closest boundary line, all while he was speaking to Shinso. I worked for the spot I have. I may be bonded to Shoyuta and I may be quirkless, but I will never stop fighting. The quirk you have is amazing. You have to fight those who think you have a villain quirk, but I have to fight every day because the day I stop fighting is the day I let them win. Midoriya muttered the beginning though his voice rose louder. He was making a statement to the world. He stopped at the boundary line, whipping Shinso around. He clutched his shoulder while the other hand held his own thigh. In a world full of those who have quirks strong enough to keep a city stable, to keep those off their deathbed, where does it leave people like me? It was now or never. Where does it leave people without a quirk? He felt the hot tears sting his eyes as he backed away from Shinso. The purple-haired boy fell to the ground, his knees still buckling. Because none of you had to work as hard as I did to make it here, so never take your ability for granted. He whipped his head around, somehow staring down an entire stadium full of heroes and bystanders. His gaze landed on Shinso, wiping the tear that betrayed his will, holding his head high as he stared Shinso down. No quirk is a villain's quirk or a hero's quirk. It's how you use it that defines what you do, that defines you. So don't come at me with your words of an experience I wish I had. I have no idea what you've been through. It may hurt being called a villain, but at least you weren't told to kill yourself, to pray you had a quirk in your next life. Turning around, he walked away from Shinso, the crowd and judges stunned. He turned his head back around. That's what it means to be quirkless in today's society, and I plan to change that. Chapter 27. Notes. Enjoy the chapter. Read the very end of the previous chapter first to get the full effect of the beginning of this one. Midnight didn't say anything at first. She was too stunned, but when Midoriya returned to his side of the field, she raised her flail high into the air, pride steeping every word she belted. Shinso is out of bounds. Midoriya advances to the next round. No one said anything at first. The crowd didn't know what to do, to be frank. It's the first time in a long time that the crowd has a collective thought and uncertainty. Go Midoriya! Uraraka screamed with a voice full of raw emotion. She knew that if no one started cheering, he wouldn't get recognized for the work and speech. More of his classmates from 1A joined. Even people in 1B applauded him. It made him stop and look back, a warm smile growing on his face. His head whipped around to the box where teachers were watching from. None other than All Might stood and applauded. It meant more to Midoriya than the teacher realized. One by one, teachers stood and applauded, some even wiping their faces clear of tear tracks. Audience members stood, some whistled, others called out his name with pride. The student thought he wouldn't ever hear from anyone but his friends and soulmate. The applause and cheers grew deafening as he walked towards Shinso, who was still kneeling on the ground, head hung in shame. Midoriya held his hand out, a wide smile on his face, tears once again sting his eyes. Don't sit in shame, you fought as much as I did. Shinso lifted his head then scoffed, taking his hand and rose up. I fought to win, you fought to survive. The annoyance slipped out of his voice. Now it was lighter yet still lazy, reminding him of his soulmate in that sense. Fighting a group of villains who are trying to kill you does that to a person. Midoriya looked around the stadium. People cheered and whistled for the boy, yet at this moment he could only talk to Shinso. It did something to my entire class, I think. They won't show it, not in a way I do, but it's the little things now. The pair started to walk back to Midoriya's tunnel. The crowd had yet to stop the cheers, it only seemed to get louder. Well, for one, my soulmate is more protective of not just me but his entire class. He views them as his kids and well. Midoriya sighed, then looked up at the box where Yamada was applauding him, as well as Aizawa, who wore a wide smile, one of pride. Let's just say I feel bad for the next person who will try to kill us? The next? Shinso asked, his hand still holding his rather sore stomach. He figured it would have a large bruise. I was offered a spot with the villains. I impressed their leader. I don't think that bodes well for me or the rest of my class, and besides, where it is good there is bad, where there is light there is darkness. Midoriya stopped walking when they entered the tunnel, out of sight from the rest of the audience. I think I set into motion plans that could have otherwise never existed because I was talking to the enemy. But what did that do? Shinso asked, leaning against the wall frankly. His stomach hurt, but he couldn't say anything right now as he figured Midoriya forgot about the nail wound on his leg. What do you mean? Midoriya responded, equally confused. When you talked to the villain, what did that do? Shinso rephrased. Picking himself up off the wall, what did you accomplish from talking to him? Besides painting another target on my back dash, Midoriya joked. Though his tone was heavy, I was trying to buy time, trying to keep my soulmate alive as well as my classmates. He had a quirk that could disintegrate anything including flesh. I should know firsthand how that feels, and I didn't want anyone else to suffer. He lifted his gaze from the floor, his emerald eyes flooded with determination. I wanted to keep everyone safe. And you did, well, minus you of course. Dash. How dash? If you shifted the attention onto you and only you must have taken quite a few blows, and besides, Shinso started to walk ahead. You said you didn't want anyone else to feel what you felt. I can only imagine it's why you wear a back brace. W dash. I didn't mean to see, but you had to get it approved by midnight, though she agreed instantly. You had to show her first. Shinso stopped walking, then turned around. His voice grew ever slightly quicker, as if he was afraid to speak again. What did he do to you? Midoriya didn't reply. He only walked quickly, grabbing Shinso's hand and leading him back to the room he stayed in until the next round of the tournament, or if he wanted he could watch the battles. He opened the door quickly, then slammed and locked it. He was in pain and panicking. In other words, he wasn't doing so hot. Please don't say anything. He shakily tugged at the collar of his shirt, just lifting it until he could feel the sudden chill of the room. It's okay, why, you can touch I if you want. Shinso was just staring at his back in fear. There was a rather large shape on the middle of his back that concave inward. It looked like a hand. The nurses said they can only do so much to fix the muscle, but the skin is retaining some of the original points of impact, so it looks like his hand, Midoriya explained, stretching a bit, and that made Shinso rather sick. The muscle moved as he shifted, the print disappearing for a moment before he sat still again, and it returned, a concave scar to always remind Midoriya what he did wrong at that moment. He let his shirt fall again, then turned around, only to grimace at the look Shinso wore. Though much different than the gazes he has shared with Midoriya already, it was one he hated the most. Pure fear, a look etched into every corner of his face. It made Midoriya panic just by looking at him. Izuku! It was Aizawa. He had made the excuse to go and grab something. It was clearly heard over the mic on accident, to cover this up, though no one believed him at this point. Are you okay? Midoriya scrambled to unlock the door, waking Shinso from the nightmare he had gotten himself trapped in, then stood back a few feet. He knew the wrath of a soulmate, and it wasn't something he wanted to get stuck facing again. Are you dash? Aizawa's gaze narrowed onto Shinso. What did he do? And nothing. I showed him my dash. He cut himself off. Aizawa instantly softened up. He cupped his face, dragging his thumbs over his cheek, trying to dry the tears. Promise? He whispered. Shinso wanted to slip out. The moment seemed to NTMT for him to linger there any longer, but Aizawa was blocking the door. I promise. Midoriya pressed a quick kiss to his lips, then turned to Shinso, who looked away. Shinso, this is Shoyuta, my soulmate. Hi, he said, his voice uncertain. Once again Aizawa glared at him. Look, I'm not one to get jealous dash. Midoriya laughed a bit, but Aizawa continued. But I don't want to find you alone with him while he's crying. I can feel what he feels, and I will know when you lie. Your bond is dash. It's new but really advanced. I guess that's what you get for being pitted against villains and almost dying. Midoriya jokes, though neither Aizawa nor Shinso found it funny. I have to head back to my seat. I can't be back here for too long. Shinso started to walk out. Good luck, Midoriya. Don't try to save everyone you meet. It might hurt you more in the end. With that he walked out, leaving Midoriya in high spirits. He turned to Aizawa, who pressed a firm kiss on his lips. I'm so proud of you, he mused, the smile faint but there. What you did was risky dash. But it brought to light what it's like being quirkless, or in Shinso case, having a villain's quirk. Midoriya smiled gently, nuzzling his cheek into Aizawa's rather calloused hand. It grounded him in the reality he didn't think he belonged in. It did, but at the risk of exposing yourself, Aizawa chided. He smiled at Midoriya. It was rather cute how cat-like he looked. Exposing myself? Midoriya asked. He opened his previously closed eyes, enjoying the simple attention, but that phrase had shifted it. What do you mean? I didn't think you would want to tell everyone you were quirkless just yet. I thought it was being saved till the end when you won. Aizawa said simply, his tone lazy, though it made Midoriya tear up. Are you okay? Why, you think I could make it to the final round? He stuttered. Aizawa only smiled softly and pressed small kisses over the tears. I never doubted that you couldn't, only that it would be hard to accomplish. It was moments like these that made both soulmates happy. Times where they were completely honest with the other only made the bond grow stronger, and the fated grow fonder of the other. Aizawa pulled him in for a loose hug. Midoriya easily reciprocated, wrapping his arms around his waist while Aizawa had his draped over his neck. He rested his chin his head, both content to stand and hold the other. Shoulda? Aizawa pulled back to see him blushing, his gaze cast towards the floor. See, can I sit with you in the booth? He asked. Aizawa furrowed his brows slightly, one of his many expressive moments. Everyone will see. Oh. This was a much bigger step than accepting the bond, then telling the world that Midoriya was quirkless, because it isn't Midoriya who will be affected by this, it's now both of them. They get it. If you don't want to, I just thought. Aizawa sighed, pressing a kiss to the scar on his forehead, then tilted his chin up, making his soulmate look him in the eye. You understand how severe this is, right? Aizawa asked, his tone gentle and soft, so soft Midoriya could only nod dumbly. Then yes, you can watch from the booth. Okay, Midoriya sighed, not realizing he was holding his breath for so long. Should we wait? What if no, that can't. Izuku, he called softly. It made Midoriya take a deep breath, then faced his soulmate once again. What do you want to do? See, can we hold hands? It was Aizawa's turn to be flustered and shocked. He didn't understand how someone could ask for so little and yet be affected by it so much. Izuku, Aizawa kneeled down. It was now Midoriya who was looking down at him. We can do whatever you're comfortable with. But your job. The UA staff all know. Some wanted me to make our bond known. Then why haven't you? Midoriya asked in a way that made Aizawa regret his word choice. Are you afraid to let others know? Yes, I am afraid. He sighed, then sat on the floor, opening his arms for Midoriya to sit in his lap. Once the boy got comfortable, he wrapped his arms around him. Heroes do have enemies, but they are likely to attack during the day. The villains who come out at night are now my responsibility, as well as the other vigilantes. But the villains who come out at night are more dangerous, more reckless than those during the day, because there aren't a lot of bystanders to watch the fight. Viving, I am afraid that once they know who you are, and since they know you're quirkless, they will do what they can to take you away from me, and I can't let that happen. Aizawa pressed another kiss to his forehead. Izuku, I want to be public about it, but I can't. Then we won't say anything for now. My class and the UA staff know, besides Shinso who figured it out. People can talk, but we won't give an official statement until both of us are ready to talk about this. Though I think learning how to properly fight will make it easier to, well, come out. A smile grew on his face as he talked, his gestures getting a bit wilder as he started to mumble and figure out a game plan on how to tell the world. Hey, we are fated. Sounds fair. Aizawa pressed a quick kiss to his lips. Midoriya's smile only grew soft, his eyes drooped a bit, relaxed and content with being alone with Aizawa. Let's go watch the matches. I can commentate better than you can show Yuta. I like to see you try. Present Mike, this round has an interesting matchup. Midoriya smiled at the scene playing out in front of him, though his stomach was tied in nervous knots. How so, little listener? Yamada has been thoroughly amused as Midoriya took his place in Aizawa's lap and has been commentating for the past 10 minutes. Mina versus Aoyama, should I explain their quirks? Midoriya looked towards Yamada, who gave the thumbs up. Well, Mina excretes acid through her skin. It's possible that's why her skin is pink raw from the quirk. Or she just has a mutant-type user in her family and this was a mix of the two. But Aoyama can shoot a laser from his belly button, a strong quirk when the user is able to wield it correctly. So, who do you think will win? Both have a fair chance, but when it comes to experience, I think Mina might come out the winner. Not a few minutes later, Mina had won the match, leaving both Midoriya and Mina smiling triumphantly. Yamada turned the mic off, then turned towards Midoriya and Aizawa, the latter resting his head on Midoriya's shoulder, now sleeping. The higher-ups like your commentating Aizu, they want you to commentate when you can, leaving for your rounds of course, Yamada explained. Midoriya beamed widely, tapping Aizawa's face gently. I'm taking your spot, I'm better at this than you, Midoriya teased. Aizawa only grumbled something under his breath, then kissed his faded on the cheek, promptly falling back asleep. He's happy, Yamada sighed. Turning around to face the field, the next opponents were stretching and getting ready to head out. How can you tell? Midoriya asked, turning his head around. He's never asleep in your class, as crazy as that sounds, a part of his brain is still active. But around me and Nemuri, he sleeps heavily, and now around you too, he trusts you Aizu, a lot. Yamada explained. The crowd roared once more as the next contestants walked out. Oh no, Midoriya grew afraid, he needed to leave before he— Deku, is that you up there? Bakugo shouted. The audience turned towards the booth to see Midoriya sitting in Aizawa's lap. Without missing a beat, Yamada turned the mic on and called the crowd to attention. This is the last song before track 2. Ladies and gents, welcome Uraraka from Class 1A versus Bakugo from Class 1A. Midoriya, what kind of fight are we looking at? Yamada turned to see Midoriya taking a few breaths before flipping the SW to his mic. Well, Uraraka has an anti-gravity quirk, she's able to turn off the gravity on any object alive or not. K-Seats Bakugo has an explosion quirk, he's able to launch himself off surfaces and attack with his quirk. Though Uraraka has more of a defensive quirk, I would have to call her the underdog of the fight. Bakugo shouted in objection, though Midnight had started the match before he could say anything bad. Yamada and Midoriya flipped the suches off for a moment. Aizawa had tightened the grip around his waist a bit more. Midoriya's fear had woken him up slightly. Is that your bully? Yamada asked, jabbing a thumb towards the playing field where the battle began. Yeah. Midoriya cut himself off, then shook his head slightly, leaning forward to start commentating. I will need to deal with this later. For now, we have some commentating to do. Yamada didn't like it, but for now, he would accept it, like Midoriya usually says, shelf it for another time. Chapter 28. Notes. It's here the Todoroki versus Midoriya fight. Let me say it was a challenge writing this chapter. Look at the end for more notes. See the end of the chapter for more notes. The match came to a close. Midoriya had to leave towards the end. Yamada had no clue how the team knew when it was wrapping up. Aizawa reluctantly let him go, pressing a sleepy kiss on his cheek before propping himself up on the desk. He's afraid for the next round. Aizawa yawned, looking towards the board to see the next matchup, Midoriya versus Todoroki. He doesn't want to hurt his friend. Shouldn't he be afraid to get hurt by the other listener? He should, but he isn't. Midoriya took a deep breath. He was once again the tunnel. The other matches passed by in what seemed like minutes, seconds even. He wasn't ready to face Todoroki, he wasn't ready for this to end, yet there was something he had to do even if this cost him the competition. He had to talk to him and his father at the same time, send the right message. Folks, this is a song you might want to listen on repeat. This next match will be one to watch. Yamada shouted. Midoriya took another deep breath, then started to walk out as the buzzer rang. The crowd cheered the minute he was in sight. The first match of round 2, we have Midoriya from Class 1A versus Todoroki from Class 1A. An interesting match, folks. No time to leave. Yamada cheered in the mic, though obviously biased. They reached the field, bowing to the other, their eyes never breaking contact. You know I have to win, Midoriya. I have to prove to my father I can fight without his quirk, Todoroki muttered, his gaze as icy as the quirk he wielded. It rivaled the passion burning in Midoriya's eyes. I have to win to Todoroki, no hard feelings? He called, lowering his body whether he wanted to admit it or not. Todoroki was someone he's studied the most. Having 2 quirks made him an interesting subject. Though there wasn't a lot on his fireside, any holes were filled with Endeavor's quirk for the time being, there was plenty on his ice side. No hard feelings, he echoed. Midnight took this as a sign to start the match. There he is, sensei. He scratched at his neck harshly, the memories surfacing and bubbling like boiling water. What should I look out for, Tamura? Watch how he fights. He's smart too, reads quirks like it's nothing. Interesting. What will you do if he wins and has to face Bakugo? Yamada asked Aizawa. Both men were sitting on the edge of their seats, waiting for Midnight's cue to start the match. I let him fight. Show you can't be serious. Yamada fought back. At times the blaze attitude is what made Aizawa, well, Aizawa. But at times like these, the same attitude made it hard to be his friend. I promised him. Aizawa bit back, sending a weak glare towards Yamada. I promised that no matter what happens, I won't stop the match. Why, what if that kid hurts him? Because he wants to learn if he's going to be a quirkless hero, he needs to learn how to face people like Bakugo without relying on help. I won't always be there for him, and if I stop a match using the soulmate excuse, it will only make quirkless people look more pathetic, at least in his eyes. The teacher had more to say, but the flail went up into the air, the mic's back on, and they could only pray now. Who's the curly-haired boy? All Might asked 13. The pros were waiting for the signal for the match to start, ready to cheer on the students. You applauded him earlier, don't you remember his name? 13 asked, amusement in their voice. I forgot, he lied, he selfishly wanted to know more about the boy. Midoriya is Deku from Class 1A, Namuri loves the kid. Snipe interjected, not bothering to look back. Quirkless and bonded to Aizawa, though that information is kinda old now. I see, thank you. He cleared his throat, folding his hands together and waited for the round to start. This couldn't be the same boy he told a few months ago, that being a hero without a quirk is impossible. Because the supposed kid was against someone with two very powerful quirks, he feared for him and yet intrigued. The crowd was silent. Midnight raised her hand into the air, pausing for her dramatic effect, then swung down and quickly held onto the railing. She knew how strong Todoroki's quirk was. The moment her flail fell, Todoroki sent an iceberg towards him, trying to freeze him in place and end the match without hurting him. Midoriya lurched out of the way, just barely. A small smile rose to his face as Todoroki sent another his way. This time he jumped over the other iceberg, the bottom being only a foot tall. Midoriya knew how his quirk worked, and making these large icebergs, with the intention to freeze not hurt, was draining him of his stamina. If he could only evade the ice for a bit longer, he would have a chance to be the first one to land damage. Todoroki sent another, this time larger, iceberg towards him. Midoriya narrowly dodged it due to the sheer speed, though it was another way to kill his opponent's stamina. Stay still, Midoriya, I don't want to hurt you. Todoroki had hissed, trying to send out one last iceberg before catching his breath. This was Midoriya's chance. Swiftly, he ran up the iceberg, jumping between a few of them, making his movements random. Fight back! Midoriya hollered, bringing his fist down to his friend's face. A loud crack was heard, thought neither was sure if it came from the other. Raising his leg, he quickly aimed for his ribs. The blow landed as Todoroki was too shocked to block the move or bring himself to use his quirk. But for the first time ever, he thought of Midoriya as an enemy, as a potential rival. No one has come this close to him. At first he was trying to just freeze Midoriya, but the swift kick to the ribs made it hard to keep doing just that. Midoriya takes the first blows. Todoroki is quite literally frozen in place. Yamada shouted, snapping Todoroki out of his daze. Midoriya, he huffed, the pain seeping into the lower part of his torso. He was in pain, and it's never happened in a match like this. No hard feelings. Midoriya sent another fist flying. This time Todoroki stopped it, using his ice to block it, and for someone without a quirk, punching a wall of ice hurt more than he thought it would. A sickening crack was heard. A few people in the audience heard it too, due to a hearing quirk, and cringed at the sound. But Midoriya only shook his hand out and lowered his center of gravity once more. He was going to fight even if it meant he broke every bone in his body. I know how he fights. He will keep sending strong attacks until I get pushed out of the ring or I'm frozen in place. His eyes darted down quickly, then back up to his eyes. He froze his feet to the ground. He's fighting for real now. Midoriya ran back, giving space between him and Todoroki, but it wasn't enough. He sent a rather large iceberg towards him. This time with a jagged piece of ice, he was trying to finish a match that just began. He thought back to the few classes he had for fighting, remembering the few classes he had that he was actually able to attend. In one motion he kicked a piece of ice off of the moving iceberg, using the top of his foot to do so with little pain. He spun around, the ice in his hand like a weapon now. The crowd went crazy. Midoriya took Todoroki's quirk and made it his own. Yamada shouted. He felt the waves of pride flood the bond. It only made him smile, though he was trying to suppress it. This time Todoroki flattened out the iceberg and started to run towards Midoriya, a hand covered in ice, though he noted it was duller than usual, which made him annoyed. Todoroki jumped down, swinging his fist down on Midoriya, though he had a piece of ice in hand to block it. A good portion still slid down his arms, creating a large gash. That's not what dash. Don't treat me any different because I don't have a quirk, I can still defend myself without one. Midoriya shouted, throwing the piece of ice at him, using it to blind Todoroki. As he threw it at him, Todoroki naturally put his arms up to use his quirk but brought the left down, making sure he couldn't use his fire side. He jumped up behind him, kicking the middle of his back and sent him to the ground. Once Todoroki was down, Midoriya ran back, watching as his friend got up slowly. Having the wind knocked out of him made it hard. Use your power against me, we aren't friends in the arena, we are rivals. Midoriya shouted, lowering his stance. Fight me like I had a quirk. Fight me like I had a quirk. Midoriya shouted. The phrase made Aizawa's blood run cold. He could only sit and watch as the arena became more and more icy, slowly running out of areas to run on. It looks like Midoriya is challenging Todoroki. Yamada shouted into the mic. The moment he turned it off, he buried his face in his hands. What is he doing, Shoyuta? Yamada muttered, looking up to watch Todoroki stand there, debating on whether or not he should use his full power, right side of course. As suicidal as it is, he wants to be seen as someone who fought until the end, just a hero would against a villain. But Todoroki is afraid to hurt him, though I don't think that crossed Izuku's mind. He replied. The blood stood out against his skin. I just hope he doesn't pass out before the end. I hope he makes it back in one piece. Don't be sorry for what I do next, you asked me to do this. Todoroki seethed. He was annoyed. Doesn't Midoriya understand he is practically sparing his life? I won't be. Picking up loose a piece of ice, he held the points out like weapons, his skin so cold it was now numb. Good. With that, Todoroki slammed his foot down, bring his right hand down as he did so. Midoriya jumped out of the way as a large piece of ice rocketed towards him. It grew to cover a quarter of the stadium, just like he did with Zero, just smaller. Though Midoriya didn't come out as unscathed as he thought, his foot was stuck in the ice. Do you yield? Todoroki asked. He was now a few feet away and getting closer. Midnight got her flail ready, as he was about to lift it in the air when Midoriya raised a piece of ice. Never. He brought it down swiftly to his foot, breaking the hold but also tearing a new hole in his leg. But with how cold he was and how much adrenaline was running through his veins, he couldn't feel the wound. All he understood was how hard it was to walk on that foot. Why are you like this? Todoroki hissed. Though Midoriya could tell he was buying time, he shot his stamina, and now he was trying to catch his breath. He's shaking? Midoriya thought. Then the bitter taste of anger arose in his mouth, words ready to spoken but cannot be said just yet. Without using my demon old man's quirk, I will beat you, Todoroki spat. He was finally taking Midoriya seriously. What dash? Before he could say anything, Todoroki sent another attack towards him, the field almost totally covered in ice, spare the few bare spots. Just stop before you get hurt, Todoroki called, the fear slowly slipping like sand through his hands. I won't stop until you fight with your full power. I am. No, you're not, Midoriya hissed, the pain slowly catching up to him, his back being the worst of it all. You refuse to use your fire. It's not my quirk, my BSRD of a father wants me to dash. Using his good leg, Midoriya jumped and swung his fist down. It collided with his cheek in the same spot as earlier. Todoroki looked up, clutching his face as Midoriya screamed at him, livid he wouldn't use his full quirk. Yes, biologically he gave you that quirk, but he can't force you to use it. It's your quirk, Todoroki, it's your power. If he keeps fighting like this and somehow wins, he won't be able to fight in the next round. He probably can't even feel the wounds he's inflicted on himself, Cementos said. Though the mic, Midnight agreed. I can't keep watching this. He's losing a lot of blood and his back isn't even healed. She explained. None of the judges were happy he was out here, especially against the wishes of his soulmate, but he was fighting and here to stay. Shoyuta isn't doing too well either. I think the bond is affecting him. Yamada was frankly worried for both of them. The emotional roller coaster Aizawa must have been going through was making it hard to watch and keep up with him and Midoriya. Should we stop the match? Cementos asked, ready to jump in and break it up, though it was Aizawa who replied next. Don't, he won't blame you, he will blame me. But at least he comes out alive, Midnight fought back. Aizawa knew she had a point but he couldn't stop this. Midoriya wants to prove he can be a hero without a quirk, and if I stop this now for the reason of his soulmate, was worried, people won't take him seriously. But they will, they've seen him fight for what he has, Cementos argued, but Aizawa only sighed in the mic. I will tell you when to stop, but for now, let it go. No one argued with him after that, not even Yamada, who was as worried as Midoriya as Aizawa was. Something isn't right, Aizawa started, staring at Midoriya. What's wrong? Yamada asked. Their mics were off as no one wanted to talk as the students argued as they tore into the other. He's fighting to win, but there's something making him fight more, Aizawa muttered. There was an issue he couldn't see. Something is stirring him up and I don't think it's good. Yamada didn't reply, both men just sat and watched the fight. Midoriya, you need to stop, Todoroki called, though neither one was about to back out of the fight. Why are you going so far? Because I want to live up to everyone's expectations, he huffed. His body felt heavy, but he was willing to rage on for him. You have it easy, being born into a family with a pro as your father. I didn't know mine, and my own mother doesn't think I exist anymore. The second sentence was quiet, only loud enough for his opponent to hear. You have a quirk and got in with a recommendation. I have to fight tooth and nail to stay in that class because I don't have a quirk. I want to prove to everyone I can do this. Why are you fighting so hard? To prove to my father I don't need his quirk to win, he said simply, though his mind was in turmoil. Todoroki's mind went elsewhere as Midoriya headbutted his chest, sending him flying a few feet. He kept his balance, then stared at Midoriya, who was ready to pass out at any given moment. It's your power, Todoroki, use it? Midoriya repeated, and this time, something happened. At once the stadium lit up as Todoroki's flames rose, melting the ice in the stadium, leaving few patches. His right side started to crystallize, small pieces of ice started to form, but in the middle where the quirks met, there was nothing. Appealing, Midoriya muttered, a large smile growing on his face. Why are you smiling? You're going to lose? Todoroki fought back. It only made Midoriya chuckle. I know, I fought to win, but in the end, I knew I was going to lose. Why did you? Oh. It was soft, but the emotion behind the realization made it worth it. No hard feelings? Todoroki asked once more. Midoriya took a deep breath and then lowered his body. Everything hurt, but at the same time nothing did. No hard feelings. With that he sprinted towards Todoroki, blood oozing from his open gashes as Todoroki got ready to use his fireside consciously for the first time in years. He had forgotten the warmth he felt when he used his quirk. He was thankful for Midoriya, thankful he helped him remember the good with his right side. Suddenly cement walls rose up, though it did little to stop the impact of Todoroki's quirk. The ice rocketed through the walls as fire seeped through. Midoriya had gotten close enough to Todoroki to land a hit, but the force of his ice had pushed him through the cement, the fire blazing in front of him. At once his world grew black. There wasn't a nerve that wasn't lit up in pain before he felt nothing at all. Notes. Well, I loved writing this battle sequence, but when it came down to it, it's challenging. Todoroki still has this powerhouse of a quirk while Midoriya is quirkless in this use, so I have to take into account what he can do already, and without his quirk, Midoriya has racked up fighting skills. In the anime now he has little to none, which is why he repeated the same moves. Slap, kick, or punch. He can't do anything fancy because that's all he knows, well, that and dodging. But it's due to his ability to read students and their quirks so well that, like he said in the past, the playing field is now level. To everyone else it's very hard to see why there is a challenge, but since Midoriya knows how his quirk works, even the small details, that gives him a much better chance compared to the Midoriya who has a quirk who is firing it trying to break the icebergs when he could have dodged. Also that Deku and Fix are coming along great, smiley face. Chapter 29. Notes. Sorry I have missed a few days. I had work and I was trying something new with the FIC. There is a surprise after chapter 30 hits. I hope you guys will like it. Smiley face. A cough tore through his dry throat, making it raw. He turned his head, pawing for a glass of water. Sudden one was brought up to his lips and all he could think about was how cool it felt against his burning throat. How are you feeling? He knew that voice, but everything was a bit fuzzy. Good. Have you seen my soulmate? Midoriya asked. He needed to see Aizawa, though the chuckle he heard made him question who was in front of him. He cracked open his eyes, hissed at how bright the light was, and closed them again. Can you find Shoyuta? He pleaded. The stranger sighed. What if you found someone new and close your age? The man had replied. This made Midoriya angry. He's my soulmate, why would you say something like that? He hissed. Everything hurts, and on top of that someone was trying to break their bond? Nope. Just tell him, another voice said. It was a man still, but he was laughing in the background. Can you find Sho, please? He muttered, trying to adjust his position, but it hurt too much. I've been here the entire time, Izuku, the stranger replied. Midoriya felt someone pick his hand up, and a smile broke out across his face. There were times where he would hold Aizawa's hand and memorize the scars that littered it. And luckily he did. Sho, he cried, trying to open his eyes, but not only were the lights too bright, but they were swollen too. Don't try to open your eyes. When you hit the wall you hurt your head. The doctors said you won't be able to open your eyes in a few days without a healing quirk. He pressed a kiss to his hand. The other was wrapped in bandages. Who won? He asked, gripping Aizawa's hand. Well, Todoroki knocked you out of the ring, someone called from the other side of the room, but as his mind cleared up he smiled a bit wider. Hi Namuri, he giggled a bit. Whatever medicine he was on made his injuries easier to manage now. You needed stitches, a lot of stitches again, little listener. Yamada started, walking to the other side of the bed. You made all of us worry. I'm sorry, he yawned, cutting himself off, but at least Todoroki isn't ashamed of his quirk anymore. Is that what you were doing? Namuri asked. Aizawa had a feeling after his student used his second quirk that Midoriya had accomplished his goal. Yeah, but I don't think I will get recommended for any agency, he said sadly. His mind started to fade in and out again. He was getting too tired to stay awake. From what we got so far, you are recommended for quite a few of them. They just want you to bring your hero costume and support items so you don't get hurt again. Yamada was usually the one to get the calls at first. Then as he got more and more the other staff would take them. That's dash, he yawned. Awesome. Get some sleep, I will still be here when you wake up. Aizawa pressed a kiss gingerly to his forehead, like usually over the scar. The gesture made Midoriya smile as he fell into a deep sleep. A day later Midoriya woke up again. This time he was able to open his eyes. Looking around he noticed Aizawa sleeping. His head rested on the mattress while his hand was holding Midoriya's, the grip never ceasing. Midoriya smiled to himself. He pulled his hand out of Aizawa's, then started to run his fingers through his hair. Aizawa sleepily leaned in the touch. It only made Midoriya happier. Aizawa muttered. Even when he was sleeping he knew his soulmate was running his hand through his hair. I'm awake, Sho, he replied. Aizawa opened his eyes to see an emerald pair staring back down at him. You can see again, he mumbled, leaning up and pressing his lips against Midoriya's. The kiss was short but fueled with love. Aizawa's has been sadly craving the past few days. How long was I out? Midoriya muttered, grabbing the glass of water then taking a few gulps. Only a day. You woke up yesterday a few hours after getting hurt during the festival. His tone grew a bit more rigid. What you did, dash. I know I shouldn't have sacrificed myself the way I did. Midoriya was expecting a lecture, though not the moment he woke up again. Yes, but I wasn't going to say that. Aizawa stood up then sat on the edge of Midoriya's bed, holding his good hand. What you did was reckless, but it came from a place of love. I know as a pro you will do things like this and I won't be there to stop you. Aizawa pressed a kiss to Midoriya's hand, though he is a bit excessive with his emotions and needs his attention, which Midoriya would deny anyway. A time like this was when he needed to show he cared. As a pro, so that means dash. As long as you don't always act this reckless, I will support your efforts to become a pro. Aizawa expected him to be happy, not so happy that he would pull his soulmate down for a searing kiss. When Midoriya started kisses, it always made Aizawa happy. It made him feel like Midoriya was okay with the relationship and where they stood. After a few moments, Midoriya broke the kiss and pressing one to the tip of his nose. As happy as I am to see you awake and safe, there's another issue. Aizawa took a deep breath then exhaled. Your mom is here. She's what dash? Izuku, a voice called. A chill ran down his spine when the door slid open then closed softly. How are you feeling? I am okay, Mom dash. He cut himself off. It felt weird to talk to her again, especially after almost 2 years with no real conversation. What were you thinking? Her voice was steady and yet sharp as if it would cut Midoriya. I want to be a hero, he argued back. She only glared at him. You're quirkless? Why are you here? He asked. Aizawa was shocked at the conversation. He would have left earlier, but the death grip Midoriya had on his hand proved otherwise. I'm your mother. You haven't acted like my mom in 2 years, he replied, cutting her off. At some point, much earlier, he would have been happy she was talking to him again. But now, he had gotten used to living with a roommate that never stopped to say hi or ask how his day was. He had gotten used to being alone. You fight in the sports festival without my permission, joined the hero course without my permission, and found and bonded to your soulmate without my permission. She scolded, glaring now at Aizawa. What you did is highly inappropriate and you need to break this bond immediately. No, he muttered. Aizawa felt his grip get tighter. In response he tightened his grip, sending pride and support through the bond. Excuse me, you don't have a say anymore. You are only 15 and I am your mother. She hissed, ready to leave the room, but noticed the door was locked. Young man unlocked the door. No, he replied, though well aware it was either Yamada or Nemuri standing at the door. You will listen to me and after this leave my room. Fine. Are you going to tell me you will stay with your soulmate without my permission? She challenged, though Midoriya only smiled. I will stay bonded to Aizawa and I will be moving out, he stated, both his mother and Aizawa shocked. I will be a quirkless hero and you will not be involved in my life unless you are there to support me. Because ever since you found out I was quirkless you slowly stopped being involved in my life and it only makes me wonder why you come now to see me. He said. Slowly his resolve was slipping and the mask falling. The fears and sadness he has faced since he was little were resurfacing at an alarming rate. Why weren't you there, Mom? You are a burden. A quirkless child contributes to life anymore. I thought if I stopped being there for you, you would end up leaving, finding work for yourself somewhere out there. She smiled but it fell, looking at the door then back at Midoriya. I don't regret what I did. Now she adjusted her skirt. Can I leave now? Leave, I don't want to see you again. As he thought, Yamada was standing by the door. He stood there for a moment before turning away, letting Mrs. Midoriya leave. When the door closed again he let out a shaky sob. Aizawa let Midoriya's now red hand go and held him gently. After a few moments, he pulled back, wiping a few stray tears, then held his head gently. Did you mean it? He asked. Midoriya furrowed his brows in confusion, then he sighed softly, looking away. Or did you say it to make your mom angry? And no, I have been wanting to ask you something. Aizawa let him go, watching him fumble with the blanket, his face a deep red. Ask away. Aizawa would say he was annoyed that Midoriya beat him to it, but it was worth seeing him this flustered. Maybe, he sighed, muttering something to himself, then looked back up at Aizawa. Can we move in tea together? Aizawa stared at him, trying to burn this moment into his memory forever. He had half a mind to take a picture with his phone. Leaning forward, he pressed a kiss to his lips, though Midoriya broke it to ask a question. So is that a yes? You're getting your stuff from your house on the way out of the hospital? Aizawa mumbled, his lips ghosting Midoriya's. Then in one swift movement he captured them again, pressing a hand into his curls. Using his good hand he grabbed Aizawa's shirt, trying to pull his soulmate closer. Don't want to hurt you, Aizawa grumbled, neither bothering to open their eyes. Don't care, Midoriya replied. Aizawa let his hand fall from the back of his neck and down his chest. I do. He slipped his tongue past his lips, almost asking Midoriya for permission. When the boy instead kept his lips closed and smiled, Aizawa knew he was in a load of trouble with his soulmate. He tried again. Instead of keeping his lips closed he broke the kiss and peppered smaller ones around his face. Don't like it? French kissing was not for everyone and Aizawa thought Midoriya was one of those people. Instead, he earned a sly smile and a kiss to his cheek. Haven't tried it, but I think it's enough for now, Aizawa grumbled under his breath before pulling Midoriya close, burying his face in the crook of his neck. You aren't too happy, are you? I would rather continue than stop, he grumbled in response, making Midoriya laugh. Raising his arms he placed the wrapped one on his shoulder while the other draped around his neck. Just to clarify, I'm moving into your apartment? Yeah. Okay, show. Chapter 30. Notes. I lied. It's not the chapter after 30, it's 30 that has a surprise, smiley face. P.S. The chapters are off by 1 because of a note I had as a chapter a while ago. This is technically 29. Not even a day later Midoriya was given the okay to go home. The nurses had healed his wound, though his back had remained untouched for now. He had an appointment to have it healed once again. Aizawa and Midoriya walked out with Midoriya leaning on his soulmate, as his leg wasn't used to moving or supporting weight. He led Midoriya to his car. Once he helped him in, he got in on the other side and started the car. Do you still have a key to your house? Aizawa asked. Midoriya patted his school uniform for a small keychain with a green key. She hasn't changed the lock since she got the house. I don't have a lot of stuff I want to keep anyway, he replied. Aizawa wasn't able to look as he drove out of the parking lot. Why? Midoriya turned his attention towards the window, looking outside at the unnaturally sunny day. A hand was placed on his knee. In turn, he placed his much smaller hand on his. He sighed, then turned to look at Aizawa. Once she found out I was quirkless, she cared for me a lot more and it was nice, but you don't have dash. I do. There are a lot of things I haven't told you yet and I want you to trust me. We're bonded and yet sometimes I feel distant from you. Not because of you but because of me, he explained. Aizawa turned his palm up, his fingers intertwined with Midoriya's. He shot him a small smile then sighed. I want us to be fully bonded. His face grew red, then he coughed a bit and continued. I know what that's asking, and I want this, I want you. Aizawa didn't say anything, though Midoriya noted the white knuckle grasp he had on the steering wheel. He took it as a sign to continue. I want to continue because I want to build our bond. He focused his gaze in front of him, watching the cars go by. My mom loved me when I was a toddler. I can't remember, but I think I had a superhero figurine that I just loved because I thought I would be a hero. Then one day we went to the doctor and he told me I had the extra joint. I was quirkless. I cried. I guess I was longing for the life I was expecting. My mom took it okay at first. She protected me more and helped me more. But as time went on, she pulled away more and more, saying she was trying to provide for both of us, providing for a cute quirkless son. He wiped a tear that strayed, taking a shaky breath in and continued. So I provided for myself. By the time I was in my second year of junior high, I was cooking, cleaning the house and providing for me and mom. She left money for me to get groceries, but I never had enough to get anything for myself. I would save the change to buy her a gift for her birthday, but that's it. The car stopped at a red light. Midoriya turned to look at Aizawa with a sad smile, tears brimming and about to fall. He only wiped them away, the frown present on his face. That's my childhood, or lack thereof. He finished. The car lurched forward as Aizawa sped down the street. And we're almost to your mom's house, he gritted out, every instinct telling him to protect Midoriya as much as he could. Ho dash. We are about 30 minutes from home. Right now we are getting your things from your mom's house. Aizawa cut him off. He had looked up Midoriya's address when his soulmate was sleeping. Well, Yamada did it because Aizawa didn't want to leave him. Midoriya, however, didn't know how to respond to that. It felt like this weight was lifted from his chest and was replaced with warmth, like sunlight hitting his skin. A smile broke out across his face. With slight giggle he lifted Aizawa's hand and pressed the back of it to his lips, content with this for now. What are we having for dinner tonight? Aizawa couldn't explain the feeling, but he assumed the warmth was not only from him but Midoriya as well. With a small chuckle he looked over at him with a small smile. Can you cook tonight? Sho Yuta, already asking me to cook. What do you normally have? Ramen. Sho dash. Or takeout? We are making a quick stop at the grocery store for dinner tonight. No more takeout? Aizawa knew he could get used to this life, that he could get used to Midoriya being there. Midoriya was already getting used to Aizawa being there. For the first time, he didn't feel so alone anymore. They stopped at Midoriya's house. Aizawa pulled into the driveway, then put the car into parked, his gaze shifting almost instinctively to Midoriya, who looked like he was staring a beast in the eyes. Do you want me to come with you? He muttered, their hands still linked and resting on Midoriya's thigh. If you want to. His voice was above a whisper but still held a soft tone. He was afraid but he wasn't trying to show it. I can feel your emotions, Aizawa said bluntly, making Midoriya even more uncomfortable. I was trying to say there isn't a point hiding how you feel. You can be honest with me. Instead I sounded like a creep. You aren't creepy, Sho, he sighed, a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. Let's head in, okay? Okay. Aizawa turned the car off and got out, though Midoriya took a breath to himself then got out, ready to face his monster. He shakily reached into his school uniform, the only clothes he had besides the torn-up gym uniform, and pulled out a green key on a key ring. No keychain? Aizawa asked. Midoriya looked up and shook his head. Never had the time to get one, he replied and opened the door. He could smell the familiar scent of his mom's cooking. A chorus of laughs was heard from the kitchen. The house hadn't been this lively in years. Midoriya broke out in a large smile as he kicked his shoes off and ran towards the kitchen, ready to greet her. Instead, what he saw made him sick. Sitting there with a plate in front of him and a glass of water in hand was none other than All Might. Both adults stopped talking and looked at Midoriya, whose smile was fading and fast. Mom dash? He muttered. Looking up at her, she only turned and faced All Might, who grimaced. Young Midoriya, I'm sorry for the intrusion. I came to talk to you as soon you were out of the hospital, but I was told you were released this morning. All Might turned to face Aizawa, who was standing protectively near Midoriya, his hand on his shoulder. What about? He asked, his hand resting upon Aizawa's, the bond there to remind him he wasn't alone, far from it. Well, being a hero is very dangerous, and I feel that a child with a quirk shouldn't be choosing an agency so early, much less one dash. Without a quirk. He finished, the old memory still a fresh wound. Aizawa had sent reassurance through the bond, but it couldn't stop him from flipping his sheet. Mind you, he has already been on edge. This was just shoving him off the edge now, and he was plummeting headfirst. Izuku, show respect to our guest, his mother scolded, bowing towards All Might, then facing her son with a scowl. Apologize? For what, being who I am or being rude to an adult? He fired back. She would have gotten closer, but Aizawa hovering above the teen made it hard to get near him. Apologize now. With a sigh, he bowed his head slightly. I'm sorry for being rude to Dash. His mouth went dry. He couldn't pluck words from the air once they hung. A villain? What Dash? Izuku. Only a villain would tell me I couldn't be a hero without a flashy quirk. He turned around, ready to walk upstairs to grab his belongings. Oh wait, I was applauded for being quirkless by the League of Villains leader, so I think that makes you worse than a villain. At least they want me. With that he walked out of the room, fuming and ready to cry, but couldn't cry here once he's home. He turned around and looked up at Aizawa, who had silently followed him upstairs. They had stopped at his room, but he hadn't had the heart to open the door. We were going home after, right? Midoriya asked, looking up at his soulmate. Aizawa nodded and pressed a kiss to his forehead. No, we still have to go grocery shopping. He replied. The simple act of shopping with his soulmate made his heavy heart soar. Let's get my stuff and leave. Midoriya opened the door and flipped the light. Estabihan. Nothing had changed in his room. He had the necessities, a bed, a roof over his head, and a hot meal, but nothing else a kid should have. His toys from his childhood were nowhere to be seen. A blanket set that looked about as old as Midoriya still covered his bed. Even his pillows were worn down. What are we getting? Aizawa asked, frankly have no clue what there was to grab. Midoriya pulled out a medium-sized duffel bag from the closet. The bag looked about as old as his stuff, and then took what clothing he had hanging on the hangers and put them into the bag. Just my clothes and one item, he mumbled, shoving the last shirt inside. Then he lowered himself more, reaching into a box that sat on the floor. Aizawa saw the toys he had as a kid, all almost looking new. Why are they so new? He asked, picking one up. It looked like a generic superhero from America. I didn't know when I would get another toy, so I took care of what I had. I love them, don't get me wrong, but I think I love them too much. He answered honestly. Aizawa placed it back in the box, then shifted his attention to the picture in Midoriya's hand, a picture of a happy family. This is when I was born. It's the only picture I have with my mom and dad. He answered honestly. A smile tugged at his lips. Look at how small I was. You're still small, Aizawa joked, his hand placed on Midoriya's head, petting his hair gently. You're just too tall, Midoriya shot back, looking up at him. Ready to go? Yeah, are you ready? Midoriya looked around the room once again, closing the closet door, then looked back at Aizawa. Let's go. Aizawa took the bag and let Midoriya carry the picture. Though Midoriya tried to grab the bag, Aizawa had grabbed his hand instead. As they walked down the stairs, Midoriya could hear someone walking towards them and fast. Once they reached the bottom, he saw his mom and All Might standing there. I won't stand for this. You can be a hero, fine, but you can't be bound to someone who is 15 years older than you. She snapped. Aizawa knew it was wrong, yet instinctually, every part of his being wanted his soulmate. Dad was younger than you. He fired back. His mother gasped, now backing away from her son. How did you dash? He was 10 years younger than you, and yet you are angry that I am younger than my soulmate? I'm not you. I wouldn't abandon my soulmate and kid. Midoriya has never been this angry before, and a part of him doubted he would ever be this angry again. Izuka dash. You can't call me by my name, only family can. With that, he grabbed his shoes and slipped them on quickly, ignoring how uncomfortable his feet felt. Aizawa followed in suit, though he did it quietly and his feet didn't hurt. Listen to Dash. Bye. He walked out the door, not bothering to look back at either his mom or All Might. The tears stinging his eyes made it impossible. I thought you would be a better person, All Might, Aizawa said simply. He wasn't one to show his anger to other teachers, even villains, but when his soulmate was getting hurt he would do anything to protect him. Aizawa, it's dangerous. He faced villains and survived but another encounter, and young Midoriya dash, the signature capture scarves had wrapped around All Might. Now he was fuming. I understand the danger, you understand the danger, and so does he, but that doesn't give you the right to tell him to give up when he gets hurt. I was in the hospital with him, I was there when he got hurt, and now I will be there for him when he's picking out an agency. Aizawa hissed, then let the scarves retract. The number one hero was angry but trying not to show it. Once you find your soulmate you will understand what it's like to want to protect them, to keep them safe but to also see them happy. With that, Aizawa walked out and bowed his head. Have a nice day. He walked to his car, only to find Midoriya leaning against the side, waiting for him. Once he got to the car and unlocked it, Midoriya slid in quickly and buckled up. Aizawa had put his bag into the back seat and got in. Someone's eager, was all he said. It only made Midoriya's smile wider. I want to go home, he said with his smile, though the tears stinging his eyes made it hard to keep it up. Aizawa noticed this but didn't mention the tears. He had a feeling Midoriya didn't want him to. Pressing a kiss to his lips quickly, Aizawa smiled and started the AR. Let's go home after we go shopping. Can I cook tomorrow? Takeout? Takeout? Chapter 31. Notes. Look at the tags, guys. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Midoriya stretched and patted the bed next to him. Aizawa was gone. He knew something was wrong because Aizawa was usually pushed out of bed with a cup of coffee waiting for him on the counter. Instead, Midoriya was the one laying in bed while the other half remained messy. Sho, where are you dashed? He turned his phone on only to yelp and fall out of bed. He had 15 minutes until class started. He scrambled out of the room, pulling his breathes on and tucking his shirt in as he went, ignoring the neatly folded note on the counter next to a cup of his favorite tea in a thermos. Midoriya rushed into the bathroom, checking his clothes before brushing his teeth and fixing his mess of curls. After brushing, he washed his face of any sleep or drool and rushed towards the door where his backpack usually hung next to jackets and an umbrella, but his bag was gone. Sho, he whined, pulling his shoes on and grabbing the other umbrella, as he had seen the state of the world through the window and it wasn't supposed to let up until later. He ran out of the apartment, keys in his pocket, then started to run down the sidewalks. I'm going to be so late. He thought. Anxiety swelled as he imagined his soulmate angry at him. Though his anxiety was soothed by the bond, Aizawa sending his reassurance through it. Oh, so he didn't wake me up? Stopping at a traffic light, he turned only to see a small alley with a box barely covered by the rain. If I'm already this late, he walked towards it, only to see a mother and 4 kittens in the box. The mom was trying her best to keep the 4 covered, but she was soaked. With her left eye closed, she looked up and hissed at him, trying to keep him away from her kits. I won't hurt you, he smiled softly and placed the open umbrella over the box. She stopped hissing and looked up, then back at him. I will bring you food when I'm off class. See you later. With that he started to run, already feeling soaked. Luckily the light to the crosswalk had turned green the moment he arrived, so he continued his momentum towards the school. Midoriya, why are you walking so slow? A voice shouted. He turned around to see Ida sprinting towards him, decked out in head-to-toe rain gear. "I'm not walking, I'm running," he called over his shoulder, though Ida had easily passed him and continued to sprint towards the school. Midoriya smiled and continued to run. He skidded into the building and stopped at the lockers. Kicking off his shoes, he opened his locker and slipped his other pair on. Midoriya sprinted towards his class, ignoring how wet he was, slammed the door open, and stopped at Aizawa. "Why, we could have woken me up." He glared up at his soulmate, who was trying to keep a neutral face. "I tried. You didn't want to get out of bed. I was going to grab your homework," Aizawa replied, unsure why Midoriya, who was typically shy about their bond, was scolding him in front of the class. "Leave a note, please." He sighed and looked away, suddenly aware of how wet his clothing was. "I did. It was by a thermos of your tea." Aizawa leaned against the chalkboard, a bit confused. "I didn't see that because I was running behind. Where's my backpack?" Midoriya rounded the podium and saw his bag on the floor. "Show, that's not fair." Aizawa was taken aback. He either wanted to be very open about the bond now to the class, or he was still stuck in his world and wasn't sure which it was. "Aizu, dry off," he started, then pointed towards his seat. "Or sit down and join the rest of the class." Aizawa watched with glee as his soulmate's eyes widened in realization as he slowly turned around and faced the class that wore wide smiles as they watched the bonded pair interact. "Midoriya, you guys are on first-name basis now. You live together? Why are you soaking wet? Does your family know?" "I will answer questions now, I guess." Midoriya looked up at Aizawa, who nodded, letting him speak. "Well, we are on first-name basis, and we live together. That's it?" "Well, who cooks?" Uraraka asked. Aizawa easily answered that one. "I can't cook, Midoriya does." That earned a few KWS from the class. Todoroki raised his hand. Midoriya furrowed his brows and pointed to him. "Me and Ida are bonded." Todoroki felt bad for Midoriya, and Ida had decided to go public with the relationship yesterday after the sports festival incident. The class focused on him in the back, some staring at Ida too. "Who else is bonded?" Kirishima asked Tsu, and Uraraka raised their hands slowly. "Are you fated?" "Me and Tsu have known since the beginning of the year," Uraraka replied. Aizawa wouldn't admit it, but watching as his class revealed their bonds made him happy. As a teacher, he knew he created a safe enough space to let his students reveal something very private. "Sho-e." The door slammed open as Yamada walked in, confused as to why everyone was smiling. "Class 1A stuff," Midoriya said, even before Yamada asked, though Yamada was more focused on Midoriya. "Aizu, what happened?" he asked, instantly taking his jacket off and handing it to him. Midoriya smiled and took his blazer off, then put the jacket on. He realized this was something he had to steal more often because it was just so warm. Midoriya couldn't stop himself from practically purring. He didn't realize how cold he was and just how warm Yamada was. He looked at Aizawa, who stared at him, then turned his head. Was he blushing? "Zashi," he mumbled his first name, now acutely aware of the attention on him, though Yamada did hear his first name tumble out of Midoriya's mouth and he couldn't help but smile wider. "What are you and Kiyama doing here? I thought Sho told you and the other listeners?" Yamada asked. Midoriya shook his head, then he sighed. "Sho? Blame Midoriya," was all he said. He shot Aizawa a dirty look and walked towards his seat, happy at the warmth Yamada's jacket brought him. "You're picking your hero names." The rest of the class cheered when Aizawa announced today's lesson, though Midoriya had no clue what he would do. Agencies are now drafting first years. Typically you aren't chosen until your second or third year, but your class is an exception. Aizawa picked the remote up off the podium and turned on the projector. A list of names ranked how many agencies were after different students. "Midoriya got the most?" a voice whispered. He lifted his head to see that he indeed got the most, though he wasn't sure how. "Well, he is quirkless, and a quirkless student fighting tooth and nail to save someone is just what a hero does," Kiyama announced, making herself known to the students. Midoriya lowered his head, seemingly ashamed of what he did, though he just didn't like the spotlight on him. "He did save me," Todoroki mumbled, agreeing with Kiyama, and it made Midoriya smile to himself. He saved him. "Let's get this started." Kiyama cheered and pushed Aizawa out of the way, though he ended up leaning against the chalkboard and watched Kiyama. "I'm not the one to teach this," Aizawa stated, grabbing his sleeping bag. "How did you choose your hero name, sensei?" Momo asked, cursing herself for speaking before he'd let her speak. Well, little listener, I can tell you that story. Yamada cleared his throat while Aizawa groaned. I asked what his hero name was, and when he said he didn't have one, I gave him one. That's it, I thought you had more to say. Kiyama sighed and turned towards her friend, who smiled. Then she turned towards the class. Start thinking of your hero names, be ready to share soon. Midoriya sat in confusion. So many names crossed his mind as he stared at the blank whiteboard. Aoyama was the first to walk up and reveal his whiteboard. Midoriya smiled weakly but then lowered his head. He had no idea what to do. Yamada snuck over to Midoriya's side. The other students noticed this but decided not to say anything. They were too focused on their hero names. Zashi, how did you choose your name? Midoriya whispered. Yamada had squatted down to talk to him while the class chose their names. You just know, as cheesy as that sounds, I knew because I project my voice as loud as I want. So presenting, it sounds like a mic is in my throat. You get the idea. Midoriya liked seeing this side of Yamada, when he wasn't being present mic but just Yamada. Okay, he mumbled. Yamada watched as he pressed the closed marker to his cheek, resting his face on the cap as he mumbled and stared at the board. Yamada decided to make himself comfortable and sat down, watching Midoriya as he scribbled something down, then quickly erased it. It seems to be going by quickly. All we have left is Bakugo and Ida. Oh, and Midoriya? Kiyama called. Yamada watched as Midoriya tensed up when his name was called. Ida placed the board on the podium. He got strange looks but no one said anything. Then Midoriya walked up. He could feel everyone's eyes on him, including Yamada and Aizawa. I am quirkless and someone I know called me this name until one day, I decided it would no longer hurt me. I want it to be the name I take to prove that you can overcome anything, including bullies and biology. He turned the board around to show the rest of the class. The quirkless hero, Deku? He got a few cheers from his classmates. A small smile warmed its way up when he saw how happy they were, except one. What do you mean that name doesn't affect you, Fing Deku? Bakugo asked, standing up suddenly, though Yamada was sitting right in front of him, and yet Bakugo didn't care. I mean it, Deku is my hero name. He was trying to stand his ground but Bakugo didn't like it. It means worthless, and it fits Fing Deku. He was trying to use the name more, trying to get him afraid again because quirkless people shouldn't exist. Why does he still exist? Fing Deku? In one motion Bakugo stood up then fell to the ground. He looked back to see Yamada adjusting his glove, as if nothing happened. He got up and charged Midoriya. Kiyama stood in front of Midoriya, tore a piece of her costume open and watched. He inhaled and fell to the ground before she covered it up until her body stopped producing copious amounts when her quirk was on, though she couldn't help small amounts that made others sleepy. Show you to wake up, Yamada mumbled, though nothing had to be said when he opened his eyes and bound Bakugo's unconscious body together in the capture weapons. Namuri, I'm taking the students with Aizawa. Watch the class? Yamada being serious was something Midoriya didn't like. It just meant the situation had so much gravity he didn't know what to do. The pro lead Midoriya out gently, his gaze soft, though no one would tell Midoriya this, as he placed a covered palm over his shoulder. The underground hero, on the other hand, was dragging Bakugo's body out while Kiyama was talking to the class about something new. Aizu, are you okay? Yamada asked. The boy nodded, subconsciously reaching up and placing a hand on Yamada's, not realizing he did until their fingers met and he pulled his hand down. Yeah, nothing new, was all he said, frankly confused why his body was betraying him and why Aizawa was doing nothing about it. When they got to Ned's office, Yamada stopped Midoriya from walking in right away. He placed both hands on his shoulders and smiled softly. Be back in a few. He pressed a kiss to his forehead and walked into the office with a sleepy Aizawa who also placed a kiss on his forehead. Midoriya stood there in shock, his hand covering the scar. What the foo dash? Notes. So I wrote this FIC and some of you caught this. It was getting increasingly harder to keep Yamada out of the story, out of their relationship. So I put him into the relationship. This FIC, for the rest of its time, will be an eraser decamic FIC. I'm sorry if some people hate the ship and hate the FIC now. I wanted to write one anyways, and it seems like this FIC progresses in a way that gives me the best of both worlds. If you are unhappy, there is a good ending after the final chapter of the sports festival arc. the previous chapter. It ties things up nicely in my opinion, but if you are thirsty for this ship then continue on, smiley face. Chapter 32. Notes. Asari Hayrace, the new chapter. This explains Yamada's role and the end notes will explain everything. See the end of the chapter for more notes. Midoriya sat outside the office, his heart pounding widely, but he knew in his heart that he belonged to Aizawa and Aizawa belonged to him. Yamada had no place in this, and yet why was he acting like this? Midoriya, come in, Nedu greeted, though from the way he spoke Midoriya knew he was angry. After spending many lunches and times after classes in his office to talk about things, he knew how to read the principal and vice versa. Hello again, Nedu, he greeted, the smile warm but it held anxieties he didn't want to delve into. Who isn't he on a personal basis with? Yamada asked Aizawa. Aizawa shrugged his shoulders then turned to Bakugo who had woken up angry. The moment he saw Midoriya he freaked out, trying to break out of the bonds he was trapped in. Midoriya, take a seat please. Nedu motioned a paw towards the chair in front of his desk. Though they were close he still had to follow the rules for this meeting. Yamada, if you would like to sit outside you can. I would like to stay in here if that's all right with Midoriya. Yamada looked down at Midoriya who nodded shyly in response. Nedu nodded with a knowing smile, though Midoriya had no clue what he was trying to tell him. I have been informed by Yamada and Aizawa that you have been bullied during your time at UA and in your previous school as well, is this correct? Nezu's tone that held a curious joy was now boiled down to a murderous rage, yet it was playful. As if he was the predator taunting prey with a game, and Nedu did love his games. Midoriya looked towards Bakugo who was seething in rage, trying to bite out of the bonds at this point, then at Yamada and Aizawa who nodded. He burrowed himself into the borrowed jacket once more and nodded, fidgeting with the sleeves. Though Bakugo only shouted at him in rage, thankfully Aizawa muffled his screams because Midoriya wouldn't have been able to take the rage and words. Aizawa, would you take him into the hall for a moment? I would like to talk to Midoriya without Bakugo's comments please. Nedu waited while Aizawa walked up to Midoriya, ruffled his hair sleepily, then walked out, dragging Bakugo out of the room. Yamada pulled himself off the wall. He wasn't an idiot. He knew the moment Aizawa was gone Midoriya would feel anxious. Nedu watched with a knowing smile as Yamada pressed his hand on his shoulder. Midoriya about sighed when he felt his presence. When was the first time Bakugo had bullied you? Nedu asked. Midoriya fidgeted with the sleeves more, looked up at Yamada who smiled and nodded, then back at Nedu. When we were kids, it's how I got this. He lifted his hair to reveal his large scar. Do you have more scars like that? If Nedu was angry before he was livid now, why would anyone want to hurt someone as kind as Midoriya? Midoriya didn't say anything. He unzipped the jacket, placing it in his lap no matter how cold he was right now, and shakily rolled his sleeves up. Yamada placed his hand on his shoulder again, trying to fight off the urge to press kisses to his abused skin. Nedu held a paw out for one of his arms. Midoriya placed the one with the least amount of scars, though it had a single large one to make up for it, on the desk. These aren't just burn scars. Was there anyone else? Midoriya stiffened up, unable to answer the question without crying. So he just nodded instead. He could feel Aizawa's worry and something else stirred within him, but now wasn't the time to dissect. Emotions. Is that how you know how to treat burns? Yamada asked. Aizawa told him something when he treated his own wound during the sports festival, but he didn't think this would be the true reason why. What about your mother? Nedu asked, noticing how Midoriya let his head hang, pulling his arm back gently as if he was waiting for any opposition from Nedu. We haven't properly talked in 2 years. She came to the hospital to tell me I needed to leave the hero course. I live with Sho now. His voice was so soft that the adults thought if they said a single word he wouldn't have been heard nor would want to continue. Since you moved, Aizawa will have to do paperwork. This made Midoriya giggle. If there was anyone who knew Aizawa's hate for paperwork, it was his soulmate. Where are the other kids who hurt you? Nedu asked. Midoriya stopped smiling. Yamada grabbed the jacket and placed it over his shoulders, keeping his hands there only reassured Midoriya. I don't know. WW went to the same middle school and TT. That's when Midoriya froze. Tears started falling almost immediately as if his brain couldn't catch up to the overwhelming emotions he felt. His mouth was dry but he continued, told me to kill myself. No one said anything. Do you have their names? This time it was Yamada speaking. Midoriya looked up in shocks. He's never seen him this angry before, not even at USJ. Why yeah? His eyes flickered towards the wall then the floor, obviously nervous. Yamada, though I hate to say it, for now, we have to focus on Bakugo's bullying after we can go after others. Nedu was playing a delicate game that involved one of his favorite students. He didn't want to lose. When did he use his quirk against you? Nedu asked, though it pained him to see the face of shock Midoriya wore. The teachers never stopped him. A quirkless kid should be dash. Yamada swiftly covered his mouth. Though it was gentle and Midoriya knew it, he still tensed up in fear. Never say that please. Midoriya only nodded dumbly. He was shocked people cared this much about him. At my old school TT there was another quirkless kid. We were friends, but then one day he stopped talking to me and dash. Midoriya cut himself off. He died. The teachers were quiet, both out of respect and shock. I met All Might the day I was going to kill myself. I asked him if someone with no power could be a hero. He said it was impossible. So I lived long enough to prove him wrong. He smiled weakly then looked at the ground, raising his hand and placed it on Yamada's. All Bakugo does now is call me names. There was a point where it was only physical, but his friends took care of that aspect until I came to UA. No more bullying, no more abuse from him, until I came back into the hero course. I thought Sho would only watch as Bakugo attacked me. I understand now he had no clue what was going on. It doesn't make it right, but at least he saved me. Midoriya smiled weakly. Nedu nodded then folded his paws. Because your mother can't come in to discuss what happens next, I will call Aizawa in as your guardian. I need to speak with Bakugo now. If you would like you could wait outside instead of going back to class. Nedu was never serious, but Midoriya just knew how serious he was at the current moment. I can wait outside. He got up quickly and walked towards the door, clutching the jacket. Thank you. Yamada bowed and walked out after Midoriya, keeping up with him, but Aizawa had grabbed him and held him in his arms. You're okay, everything is fine. Aizawa whispered words of encouragement to Midoriya. The teen could only sob in his arms. I can take dash. Don't go, please. Midoriya didn't know why, but the idea of Yamada leaving right now made his heart hurt. Yamada smiled and walked up to Midoriya, almost as close as Aizawa was. I won't go anywhere. He wrapped his arms around Midoriya with a smile while Aizawa let go and walked towards Nezu's office, an angry Bakugo in turn. Did he watch all of that? Midoriya asked. Aizawa gestured to the blndfld he had wrapped around his eyes. He shut up when it was on, thank God. With that Aizawa pressed a kiss to his forehead and thus began the dreaded wait. Yamada took a seat outside the office, sitting awfully close to Midoriya, trying to hint at him that there was something more. I have a question. This ought to get him to look at his soul mark. What does your soul mark look like now that you and Sho have bonded? They are always active, but after I woke up they just haven't been that active. It might be because we live together now and they aren't chasing the other anymore. He suggested. Yamada wanted to show him so badly, but Aizawa had made him a promise. This isn't good. Yamada sat in the bathroom, looking at his bare chest, staring back at a small bird. He ironically thought it was a cockatiel, but that was beside the point. He has a soul mark now, he should be happy. But it was the mark, or rather marks, that made him afraid. A black cat and a green bunny happily chasing after the newest member, his bird. Hizashi, are you okay? Yamada was visiting Aizawa and decided to take a shower after a long day of hero work, and when he got out, instead of putting a shirt on, he was caught up staring at his soul mark. His breath hitched. Aizawa can't. I'm coming in, you better not be naked again. Aizawa opened the door and stared at Yamada. He had his breathes on still, but he was more interested in the cat and bunny chasing the bird around. Aizawa pulled his shirt up and watched as the cat had caught the scared bird while the bunny was trying to comfort it. I just found out. How did this dash? Thank you God. Aizawa shut him up with a searing kiss. With his hair down he was able to grab at it. Taking a fistful, he pulled slightly. They dated once, and yet it seemed like time hasn't stopped for the couple. Yamada groaned, but he had to stop this. What are we going to tell Aizu? Both men knew the teen. He would happily be a third wheel in the relationship if it meant Aizawa got to be with Yamada again. Let him find out. What I did, he mumbled, letting his hair go slightly and pressed a gentler kiss against his lips. I don't think I stopped loving you. I don't think I did either, and I was lucky Aizu is well. Aizu, any other soulmate would have gotten jealous and I don't think we would have been able to talk the way we do. Yamada mumbled, pressing a kiss against his cheek. I don't think we would have been able to act the way we do. We already act dash. He couldn't bring himself to say the obvious, afraid he was the only one to think it. Like we're bonded? I got that feeling too, but it doesn't explain why your soul mark showed up now. Typically marks showed up when the other soulmate was born, but in Yamada's case, he hasn't had any sign of one until now. I still felt something. It's why we dated in high school. It's why I favor Midoriya over everyone else. I didn't have a soul mark, but I still wanted to take care of you both. Aizawa pressed a few kisses on his neck, humming in agreement. Let's not go too far without Aizu. I want to hear his opinion, Aizawa finally said, wrapping his arms around Yamada's neck. Even if we can't be bonded together, I'm sure Aizu wouldn't mind if you both shared me. It doesn't sound like Aizu to do that. You've seen how he acts? Like he's hopelessly in love? Aizawa rolled his eyes, though it was true, they all did. Yeah, just have to wait until he finds out. I hope it won't be too long. That was a week ago. They had hero work to do and stopped by Aizawa's apartment to freshen up before seeing Midoriya again. And it was a week too long. You look so adorable in my jacket, Aizu, Yamada cooed, watching as his new soulmate blushed, trying to hide his face in the collar. Do you want it back? He stuttered out. Yamada wanted nothing more than to scoop him up and press a kiss against his lips. Instead, he opted to press a kiss to his forehead, his hand holding Midoriya's. Midoriya's brain once again has short-circuited. Wouldn't Sho get mad at you this close? Midoriya knew how jealous Aizawa could be and he didn't want Yamada to get in trouble. I got his permission actually, he teased. He's not lying, he did get permission to be cuddly, but he couldn't tell him they were bonded. Oh, okay. With that, Midoriya laced their fingers together and snuggled up against his arm the best he could, sitting in the chair. This is fine, though I might just tell him we're bonded, Yamada thought, melting into Midoriya's touch. You're warm, Sho is always cold, he mumbled. If Sho gave permission, then he wasn't going to fight the feeling anymore. Does that mean kisses too? I got full permission, he mumbled. Midoriya lifted his head in shock, as if he couldn't believe. He didn't understand the feeling. He had Aizawa and his bond was happy. He was happy, and yet why was his heart after Yamada too? But if Yamada had asked Aizawa, he must have felt something too, but just what? Midoriya was the first to lean in, his head moved a bit too close and he pulled back only for Yamada to lean in. His eyes flickered to his parted lips, the ghost of his breathing warmed his. Midoriya had no clue what to do now with him. Suddenly a shout down the hall had made Midoriya pull back and look at who it was. Midoriya, you're cheating on your soulmate? Uraraka had shouted. Midoriya shook his head frantically. And no, Zashi got permission from Sho. Uraraka had stopped in front of the man, staring him down, then her eyes widened in realization. She knew that look. It was the same one Aizawa had before they had bonded. What? Are you Dash? Yamada seemed to understand the question she was asking and nodded stiffly. It grew quiet. Then a burst of laughter from the anti-gravity girl had broken the tension. Oh, of course, Midoriya would have Dash. She burst out into snorts and giggles. Have what? He asked. Confused as to what was past just moments ago, Uraraka stopped laughing and stared at him in confusion. Doesn't he know? She asked. Yamada shook his head. Uraraka only yelped and ran back down the hall, shouting her apologies and her congratulations for them. What was that about? Midoriya asked, their hands still linked, though he was ready to get up and ask her himself. I will tell you another time, Aizu. For now, let's wait out here for Nedu. Midoriya didn't cuddle back against him. They didn't try to kiss again, but they still held hands. Midoriya would deny, smiling as Yamada traced small circles on the back of his hand. Notes. So, Yamada has a soul mark, now you're asking. Well, Mickey, he wasn't born with one. How does he have one? I can answer that. Besides being convenient to the plot, I have another reason. Like Yamada said, he naturally gravitated towards his soulmates, dating Aizawa in his youth and caring for Midoriya much more than he would a normal student. Though instinctually he felt this pull, but physically he doesn't have the mark to prove it. After a turn of events, his bond was revealed. Like since 2/3 pieces showed up, the third piece appeared, but it was always there, just no mark to prove it. Sometimes you can feel the mark, like if the soulmate is in extreme anguish you will literally feel the animals attacking the other, but for the most part they are just normal tattoos that move. Remember this bit, it will come in handy in the next few chapters. Comment any questions you have. See you later guys. Chapter 33. Notes. This one is short for a reason, please read the end notes. See the end of the chapter for more notes. They sat in Nezu's office, though this time it was with Bakugo and his parents by his side while Yamada and Aizawa were with Midoriya. It's been brought to my attention Bakugo has been bullying Midoriya during his time in class and in the past. Nezu said, folding his paws together, in the heroics department, we do not tolerate bullying. Katsuki is a little sheet but he isn't a bully, Midoriya can't help that he's quirkless, Katsuki was only trying to toughen him up. His mother defends. Bakugo stared at Midoriya with a ticked-off glare, though a smug smile sat on his face as if he won. I have evidence as well as proof that you may not have access to confirm his bullying as well as the bullying and physical abuse on Midoriya. His mother turned towards Midoriya, eyed his soulmates then scoffed. Inko told me what happened, you should be ashamed for talking back to such a sweet woman, his mother stated, then turned to face Nezu, though it wasn't Nezu who spoke next. I teach both of them. The first day Midoriya came into my class your son activated his quirk and intended to use it against him. It's illegal to use a quirk against another without reason, and his reason was to hurt not show off. Aizawa said simply, though Midoriya was on edge, ready to snap at any moment. You can't say anything, you're just his soulmate, rather disgusting that a 15-year-old boy decided to bond with a middle-aged man don't you think? Maybe Katsuki was trying to protect him. It was as this moment, Midoriya snapped. He shot up from his seat, throwing the jacket back to Yamada and rolled the sleeves of his shirt up, revealing burns and scars. Your son did this to me, his friends did this to me, he taught me how to survive in a society that will try to kill you at any given moment. He hissed, fear started to build yet he suppressed it and kept going. Your son has hurt me in every way possible, the day I saved him he told me to kill myself not even hours earlier. I am so lucky to be here because I wouldn't have met my soulmate. He wiped his tears, standing straight up and he pulled the sleeves back down. He saved me from myself, while Bakugo tried his DMN best to prove how good he is by beating a student who can't defend himself. I hope it was worth the satisfaction because there will be a day when I will beat you without a quirk, with my wit and my strength without my soulmate to help me fight. You have caused enough damage to my body and I will give every ounce back to you. Taking a deep breath, he wiped a stray tear, and walked back to Yamada, grabbing the jacket gently, slipped it on and sat back down. Nezu you may continue. Well, I think it's appropriate for the Bakugos to defend themselves. Nezu was trying his best from smiling widely, from cheering on Midoriya, though Yamada and Aizawa were doing just that. Aizawa had placed a hand on the crook of his neck, trying to gain some skin contact without reaching for his hand. Yamada, on the other hand, had grabbed Midoriya's hand and laced their fingers together. "Ai Katsuki?" His mother turned to her son who was practically foaming at the mouth, ready to jump up and kill Midoriya. "Fucking hell you stupid Deku!" He growled, jumping up with his hands bared with explosions. In one movement Midoriya jabbed his throat, not hard enough to kill him but enough to make him stop and cough, and watched as Bakugo started to heave, trying to clear his throat. "I told you I would give everything back to you. I remember the day you used this on me." Midoriya squatted down, holding his hand out to help him up. "You watched me struggle to breathe, you almost killed me, but I got home and patched myself up while you made fun of me the next day. So I'm here, helping you up because I feel remorse for hurting you. Did you ever feel bad for hurting me?" Bakugo slapped his hand away. Looking up he glared into the now icy, emerald eyes. "Gee go to hell." Midoriya stood up and walked towards the exit. "Afternoon tea?" he called out. Aizawa and Yamada turned to Nezu who nodded. "I will have something stronger brewing today," Nezu called back knowing he will have a headache by the time lunch rolled around. Midoriya walked out, shaking in anger and sadness as he stormed into Recovery Girl's office. "I jabbed Bakugo in the throat," was all he said. She looked at him then sighed. "About demon time you did something, take the bed, I will lock the door." She walked out, locking the door. He walked towards the bed and fell face first, Though it hurt slightly, he only sighed and curled himself around the jacket, then breathing in. His scent was intoxicating. It made him feel safe and at home, like everything was just complete with him around. But that can't happen. He's bound to Aizawa, he's falling in love with Aizawa, he can't leave him for someone he wasn't bound to. And yet, the jacket made him feel safe. The phantom touches of Aizawa only cemented this feeling of being at home. He felt at home with Yamada and Aizawa, together, and it made his heart twist in pain. Notes: the reason why we don't see Bakugo's true damnation is that there will be a flashback in the future explaining his fate and what's going to become of him. But I hope you can accept angsty moments with cheering soulmates on the side. Chapter 34. Notes: angst. A few days later, Midoriya had woken up in Aizawa's apartment, though he woke up on the couch. But he started to distance himself from Aizawa. He was afraid of the new feelings he was slowly drowning in, afraid of the dreams he started to have with not only him and Aizawa, but Yamada had joined. It started innocent, just talking and hand-holding, then it lead into kisses and heavy petting. Then they consummate their bond. Midoriya always woke up at that part, always hot and especially bothered because he is essentially cheating on his soulmate and he didn't know what to say. Though today it didn't matter. Today he was leaving in the early morning to work at an agency and not coming home until later tonight when Aizawa would be at work as an underground hero and Yamada asleep. Yamada started to stay some nights. It almost felt like he was being replaced, and it made sense. If Yamada had the same effect on Aizawa as he did on him, then logically he would be with someone who could please him more than Midoriya could. With his hero costume sitting in the box, he took a deep breath and walked out of the house. Food cooked for Yamada and his soulmate with a bit for him in a bento. He was meeting with Nedu, his private mentor for his studies. Though Nedu didn't have an agency, he offered to teach him and further his wits and strengths while keeping up with his studies and keeping him out of sight of Aizawa and Yamada, per his request. The walk to school, an hour earlier than usual, was weird. Usually Aizawa would drive and they would talk to Yamada. He knows now that he shouldn't get in the way of a blooming relationship. It wasn't healthy to stay, but he didn't have a choice. As a soulmate, they care for the other and help the other mentally, meaning if Midoriya isn't around him when the bond wasn't complete, it could hurt both of them. But if the bond broke, it would leave room for Yamada. It would make Aizawa happier than he was with. I can't think this way right now. I need to keep a level head when I start my training with Nedu. A hero of wits and observation. A perfect mentor for me, but almost too perfect. We know each other's weaknesses and strengths. Midoriya thought, picking up the pace. But that's what makes it a good mentorship, exploiting our weaknesses to further the other along. I guess we're helping each other out. He stopped at the entrance of the school and used the special key card Nedu had given him to get past the locked gates. The metal door retreated slightly. He walked past the sensor, then it slammed down again, scaring him. "Good morning, Midoriya," Nedu called from the PA system. He just arrived and already he was being tested. "You may place your things by the entrance, then make your way to my office. You have 1 hour. What is he going to dash? Midoriya narrowly dodged a pencil that had flung into the ground like a weapon. "Oh shit. Okay, think. He's expecting you to run towards the entrance, but expecting you to go around from a side entrance. Expecting me to use my box as a shield, but will expect me to put it down and run for one of the options. He's expecting me to be spontaneous and switch it up with an obvious choice and not obvious choice. So now I have a choice. Do I start to climb the window and keep my stuff with me, or do I go through an obvious choice?" He doubted Nedu would think he could scale a building like UA, mainly because it's almost impossible, but after being pushed a few too many times, he's learned how to grab and hang, how to dig his nails into the brick and climb. He decided to scale the building, biting the handle to the case. He jumped and caught onto the windowsill, pulling himself up, then held onto the metal beams and started to pull himself up until he grabbed the next beam. There wasn't a way to protect the building from those who can climb with a quirk without breaking the glass. It was a fact he has learned and now used to his advantage. Nezu's office was one of the top ones, though based on the view he was on the right, his left of the building. "Very clever, Midoriya. I didn't expect you to climb up a building exterior almost entirely made of glass and metal. Be warned, you chose this option. Don't be late though." Nezu's cheery voice made him question what was going to happen next when another pencil had whizzed past his ear, nicking him slightly. "Do I get a band-aid and tea when I get up there?" He shifted the case then called out to Nedu, the mic turned on only for him to hear an amused laugh. I would be a monster if I didn't have your favorite ready to be brewed. Midoriya rolled his eyes, adjusted the case again and swung his weight up, pulling him up the next window. This time an old textbook was thrown out of the window, followed by a few more. Midoriya jumped to the next window, almost slipping then waited for the next one. The moment the next book fell, he grabbed it, though it almost made him fall to the ground, he held it open and continued to scale the building. The pencils pierced the book and it was heavy, but he slowly made his way to the open window. Once he reached the top, he threw the book in then inched his way up the beam that supported it. With what little energy he had left, he pulled himself up and through the window. He fell onto his back, legs dangling out of the window as he breathed. Nedu appeared upside down as he stood over Midoriya. Slow, but expected for taking such an interesting route. How did you learn to scale buildings like that? Bakugo. He huffed then sat up and looked over at his case. Very heavy, for no reason. You have more protective gear than most other students. It's expected to be heavy, though by the end of your mentorship it will become significantly lighter. How? Oh, simple. You will carry it through all lessons including strength and fitness ones. You must get used to the weight you will carry not in armor but in representations. The first quirkless hero to stand in the light must be strong enough to do so. Nedu placed a bottle of water next to Midoriya, then sat down next to him. Take a small break. Then we will get on to the next lesson. K. Rule hashtag 219A? Eninzu I can't do anymore. Rule hashtag 219. And it's dash. Rule hashtag 219. With a shaky start, he pushed himself up then immediately fell back on the floor. The usage of Q-quirks without a P permit is illegal, he said simply. It was the newer and more commonly used rules. But trying to do push-ups with a metal case and a fuzzy animal on his back made it hard to keep talking. What has he gotten himself into? A few moments earlier, Aizawa woke up, a smile on his face when realized he was holding on to someone. He cracked his eyes open and pressed a kiss to his shoulder, but a sinking feeling in his stomach made him pull away. He didn't come to bed last night? Aizawa mumbled. Yamada turned and faced him, squinting his eyes as he looked at Aizawa. He slept on the couch again. It was the third night in a row that Yamada had slept over. The third night in a row Midoriya slept on the couch. Might still be here, Aizawa mumbled. He walked into the living room only to see the blanket neatly folded, the pillow resting on top. In the kitchen was a full pot of coffee and breakfast covered by pot lids with the burner on the lowest setting. Still made us breakfast, Yamada sighed. His hair was up in a loose bun as his hair was naturally resting on the top of his but went down. I don't know what to do. If we tell him he might accept out of pity and this will keep up longer it's permanent even, but if we don't he might just break the bond so we could be together. Aizawa closed his eyes, leaned against the nearest wall and let his head fall back against it. Breaking a bond was one of the most painful things a human could do to themselves willingly. Those with the experience say this is more painful than childbirth. Though Aizawa wasn't focusing on the pain, but rather how he was going to live without one of his soulmates in his life. I think we have to tell him, Yamada stated, falling back onto the couch with a sigh then laid back. I don't think we have a choice anymore if we want the bond to stay healthy. He lifted his shirt. The animals were in disarray. The bunny was missing, hiding elsewhere as the cat hissed at seemingly nothing and the parrot hopped around, not even bothering to flying next to the angry cat. We should talk to him when he gets back, he suggested, but Aizawa shook his head. You would be sleeping or at the radio station and I would be working as an underground hero. He planned his schedule too well. Aizawa shook his head then looked at the clock that hung on the wall. We have to eat and get ready for school anyway. Fine. Aizawa pressed a gentle kiss on his lips then walked back into the kitchen and fixed them plates of their soulmates cooking. It was about noon when Nedu called for the first break today. He had been nice, in Nezu's words not Midoriya's, to give him small moments to breathe or drink water, but the idea of having a proper break to eat was gone the first hour into the training. After lunch we will be meeting with a teacher who is very skilled at hand-to-hand combat. I lack in that department and you need to be taught how to fight. Nedu said, opening his bento to reveal a meal mainly made out of vegetables, though there was little sausages in the box. I decided to try meat for the first time. Well, specifically sausages. As you know, rodents are herbivores. At least the species I used to be was. Midoriya watched curiously. He hasn't even opened his own lunchbox yet, hoping for an amusing reaction. And amusing it was. The moment Nedu took a bite of the new snack, he stopped smiling, a first for Midoriya, and sat still. He brought a napkin up to his mouth and spat the meat out, reaching for his tea to wash the repulsive flavor down. I think I am still a herbivore through and through, was all Nedu said, before picking up a fork and he started to eat his salad. Midoriya laughed and opened his bento, revealing a basic bento compared to the food he had left his soulmate and his partner. Plain rice paired with an egg and fried fish, remnants of last night's dinner and this morning's breakfast. Did you make your bento yourself? Nedu asked, his tone light while careful. He was aware Aizawa and Midoriya were fighting but didn't know the extent of it. You can ask, we are friends, way past colleges at this point. Midoriya swallowed a bit of rice and waited for him to speak next. Very well. Why are you and Aizawa no longer speaking? He asked. Midoriya picked up a bit of egg and looked down upon it. Yamada, he mumbled, then took a bite, chewed and continued. They dated in high school and still had lingering feelings, but I didn't take any notice to it. Yamada is nice and Aizawa cares for him. Who am I to stand in the way of that? But I think they started dating. Yamada said he had gotten permission to be cuddly with me like Zawa, but I feel like it's wrong somehow. Midoriya took another bite of egg, then shifted towards the fish. Do you have a bond? No, I don't think I will care for anyone like that. After all, I was an animal before all of this. Nedu replied, then took a sip of tea. Talk to Aizawa. Perhaps there is a Ms. Dash. I saw them kiss. Aizawa looks at Yamada the way he looks at me. Besides, if there is anything I'm good at, it's observing and drawing conclusions. Midoriya smiled softly, his gaze never meeting Nezu's. He placed the chopsticks down and picked up the teacup and saucer, took a sip, and put it down again. I don't have a place in the relationship anymore. It was bound to happen since I'm so young, but I can't leave him without hurting him, so I will stay with him. Our bond won't go any farther than the stage that it's at, but I will support both of them. The sad tones in Midoriya's voice are what made Nedu snap. Though he was a refined mammal, he wouldn't show this externally. But internally? He was planning every way possible to murder Aizawa and make it look like an accident. A knock at the door snapped Nedu out of his thoughts. He beckoned who it was inside, Kiyama. Hey, I'm going to be what's wrong? She noticed the heavy atmosphere only moments walking in. Nedu patted the couch next to him where a teacup sat across on the table for her. Midoriya has revealed something interesting, Nedu started, looking towards Midoriya, who nodded softly and continued eating. Aizawa is cheating on him. For once Kiyama was speechless. Say that again, that can't be right. Midoriya saw them kiss and he looks at Yamada the same way he does Midoriya. Is this correct? Nedu turned to Midoriya, who was nodding along softly. Hearing this from someone else made it hard to bite back the tears. Aizawa was much older, so this is fine, right? I'm going to kill them both. Don't please. Midoriya called, almost dropping his food. She looked at him with a curious yet sad glare. I don't blame him. Explain. He's much older than me, and as much as I care for him, he loves someone else more, and that's okay. He started, his voice breaking slightly. I tell myself it's going to be okay because it will. I have to stay by him or the bond breaks, hurting him more than me since I broke it, so I will support him and Yamada. Absolute not. If he is cheating on you, break that FING bond. Kiyama stated. Midoriya flinched and looked up at her with wide eyes brimming with tears. Look at you, telling us it will be okay, but here you are about to cry in your food. She walked over and wiped the stray tear, then sat down next to him. We are going to prove you don't need him. You don't need a cheating soulmate to make you feel better about yourself. She placed a hand on his shoulder, a small yet sad smile dancing across her lips. How? I came here to teach you how to fight. Nedu asked me because we know each other, plus I'm one of the few that didn't take anyone to mentor this time around. She ruffled his hair, then pointed to the clock. Eat up, we start training in 15 minutes. He wiped the tears, then smiled, nodding his head, right? He didn't need a soulmate to feel better about himself. He would be fine. Chapter 36. Notes. See the end of the chapter for notes. He wasn't going to be fine. Nedu was nice, I'm not. Midnight called sadistically. She had to be skilled at fighting because sometimes she couldn't use her quirk due to heroes or civilians. But Midoriya was facing a demon, he realized. He stepped out to the left, his arms up with his bracers on as she lashed the WHP. He hasn't gotten a single hit on her yet. Nedu sat in the back of the closed-off gym tied up. He was just sitting with ropes in his lap. Midoriya, if you don't hurry I will be severely hurt by the villain. Nedu called out. He groaned and shifted his weight back, taking the hits on the bracers from her WHP. Come get me, hero, she called. Midoriya decided to end it as his forehairs were burning from staying so stiff. When she brought it down again, he raised a single one up and farther than the intended distance so it would wrap around his arm. The WHP lashed at his bareskin but he was able to snatch it out of her grasp. Then launched his offensive attack. He took steps forward, lashing the W back at her, seemingly with poor aim. Then when she had gotten ready to fight back he leaped forward and lashed it on an angle, wrapping around her arms and torso, essentially binding her. The hero won. Nedu called. Midnight looked annoyed but rolled her eyes and sighed anyway. Congrats, you used my weapon against me, now untie me, she grumbled, though Midoriya was sure she was going easy on him. With the WHP untied, she looped it back up before settling her body, ready to fight again, but the gym doors opened, revealing a set-off Soulmate and his boyfriend. Hey Aizawa, Midoriya smiled slightly. It stung to see Yamada trailing behind him but he knew it was for the best. Maybe we shouldn't dash. Aizawa glared at Yamada then turned to look at Midoriya. Why are you avoiding us? Aizawa asked, ignoring the fact that Midoriya had used his last name, regressing in their bond essentially. I just wanted to give you guys time to settle, he mumbled, bowing his head slightly. I don't have any plans to break the bond. Do you have no right? Kayama snapped, balling her fists. Aizawa looked up at her in lazy annoyance. No right to ask my soulmate if he's okay? He asked. Kayama was worried for her own reasons but Aizawa didn't seem to understand why. Nuri, it's okay. Midoriya smiled then hugged Aizawa gently, trying to reassure the bond with fake happiness though he wasn't sure how fake it felt. I'm okay Aizawa, I was just worried about today's mentorship. If you say so, he mumbled, pressing a kiss to his forehead then walked away, waving behind him. Though Yamada knew something was up, he wasn't as blind as Aizawa could be sometimes. For a man who was rational enough to identify deception, why wasn't he worried about Midoriya? Midoriya, I don't think it was the best idea to lie to him. He's going to find out, and when he does dash. I know Nedu, but looking someone in the eyes, especially someone that's supposed to love you and know they have failed on their end, he lowered his body, his smile weak. Well, I'm no stranger to the feeling. Something isn't right, we have dash. I know, he was lying back there, didn't even address me personally, he hissed, leaning against the wall. I think we messed up. You think? Namuri knows, and I'm assuming Nedu, Aiza must think something bad of both of us. He probably wants to break the bond. He sighed. Already his new soulmate wanted to break the bond and he didn't know how to stop it. It doesn't matter if they know, what matters is Izuku right now dash. He dragged a hand down his face then looked at Yamada. He won't break the bond because it will hurt me but he will stick around and feel like an outsider in his own bond. We have to tell him, maybe if I explain everything dash. We don't have a choice. I didn't tell him in the first place because I didn't want him to feel like an outsider but he does, Aizawa muttered, spitting the words out as if they were poison to him. We messed up, big time. Maybe we can talk to him when he gets home, I can stay up and maybe you can take the night off? Yamada asked. Aizawa shook his head. It was risky but in the end, it couldn't happen. You know how dangerous it is for me to take a night off and last time you pushed yourself and stayed up all night. Yamada ended up in the hospital because of the incident and Aizawa had gotten reprimanded by police for taking the night off, as stupid as it sounds. So then what do we do? Because I just found out I have soulmates and the first thing I've done was drive a wedge between you both? Yamada growled, stalking closer to Aizawa. I won't let it happen even if it means I have to leave in order for you both to be happy. You aren't leaving and neither is he. I just need to talk to both of you at the same time. We haven't talked as partners, only you and I have. Aizawa sighed, raking a hand through his hair. I'm going to talk to him tonight. Yamada opened his mouth to speak but Aizawa held a hand up instead. Don't, it will be fine. I will explain the situation and tomorrow we can have lunch together and talk about it all together. Yamada stared at Aizawa, his eyes taking in his features. Aizawa was never this serious. Sure, he could have his moments, but usually it was blasé, kinda unfocused. He's never seen him this worried in public. Before, panic attacks are normal but are behind closed doors. Standing in a hallway wouldn't count as behind closed doors to him. Fine, let's head back. Class is starting soon for both of us. Yamada held his hand out. Aizawa grabbed it with a sigh. Fine. Shigaraki sat at the bar, scratching his neck gently, a tic he has when thinking. Kurogyri, he started. Kurogyri stopped cleaning a class, then looked up at him. When do you think he will get here? The special guest? I'm not quite sure when he will be here. Sensei only gave you date, not a time. He chastised. Shigaraki only clicked his tongue, itching his neck a bit harder out of annoyance. The door opened slowly. He stopped itching his neck, watching as Toga bound, and then Dabi walked in. Following them was the guest they have been waiting for, Stain. Look at his swords. I bet you just get tons of pretty blood, right? Toga cheered, holding a small switchblade in her hand. Mine is so tiny, but I still get a lot if I push hard enough. What do you want? Stain asked, glaring at Toga, then looked up at Shigaraki. To join the League of Vil Dash. No thanks, he said simply. Toga whined, stomping her foot. Why won't you join us? Is it because Shiga is creepy? Don't worry, we all tell him he is. She placed her hand by her mouth, loudly whispering the last part with a small smile that grew. So join us, you can get all the blood you want. It's not blood I want, it's justice. Heroes are only villains with a fanbase, he explained, unsheathing a sword then glaring at the blade. I have yet to find a hero that is worthy of being a hero. We both have a person in common then, Shigaraki said, itching his neck slightly. There is a boy, quirkless but can read your quirk faster than professions. Do you think he is worthy of my blades? Stain longed for someone to take after him. There hasn't been a hero nor villain he could call his successor. The police were getting closer and closer to finding him. It was only a matter of time before they caught him and his reign of justice would be over. I say he's worthy of much more, he mused, pulling the hand off his face, then smiled widely. You will find Midoriya Izuku to be much more than worthy. She's amusing. Amusing, Stain mumbled, his eyes lingering on the wicked smile Shigaraki held, then looked down at the blade. Amusing, did you offer him a chance in the league? Yeah, and he said no. What a big JRK, Toga grumbled, puffing up her cheeks. Though she wasn't there, the picture they had of him was greatly appreciated. He said no. Stain looked up from the blade, a smile growing on his face. Okay, Shigaraki, I will decide if this boy is worthy, but you can't stop me from testing others. Partners? Shigaraki asked, looking down at the palm of the hand he usually wore. Partners? Shigaraki placed the hand back on his face, turned around, and walked out of the room. See you later, Stain the hero killer. Notes. So you might be wondering where a few scenes are. Well, there is a small gap between the previous chapter and this chapter. Midoriya avoiding Aizawa. It gets mentioned. Heck, it's the reason he goes to check up on him, but you guys haven't read the scene yet. That's because it's being posted as a small one-shot that can be a standalone, or if you want it could be more info to this world. It's being posted in a series one-shot. Series one-shot? Well, I plan on making more fics surrounding Yamada, Aizawa, and Midoriya, but the scene like the one mentioned that don't make it in are going to be added there. Each chapter will tell you where it's from and after what chapter, that way you can pop on over. If I have a chapter like this where a scene is missing, I can say, check chapter 5 of the one-shot series, and you can read a new scene. These scenes will start to be posted for Aracertica month during my vacation. Chapter 37. Notes. Y'all, you're gonna eat your heart out during today and tomorrow's chapters, smiley face. See the end of the chapter for more notes. When Midoriya got home, he was instantly greeted by the scent of food, though it was burning to say the least. Kicking off his shoes, he dropped everything and ran into the kitchen to see Yamada fanning the stove while the smoke alarm went off. Hi dash, he coughed loudly, batting the smoke alarm off the wall, then opened the window. How was training? What are you doing? Midoriya practically screeched, taking a cutting board out of the cupboard and started to fan the smoke towards the window while Yamada took the pan off the stove and sprayed water over it. Trying to cook an apology dinner? It sounded more like a question, though the sentiment made Midoriya stop fanning and smile. Apology dinner? He asked. Yamada coughed once more to remind him of the smoke that still lingered in the air. He started the fan once more, the smoke dissipating. For the past couple of days Shoyuta and I haven't been completely honest with you. He was going to stop you for lunch but I needed to talk to you. Yamada started slowly, almost all the smoke had cleared out so Midoriya stopped fanning, but they took the conversation to the living room once Midoriya knew all surfaces were turned off and pan in the sink. Midoriya finally noticed how stiff Yamada was, though he had his hair down and a new pair of glasses on. It was late, why would he still be up to talk about something he already knew? Midoriya I know, he replied softly looking down at the ground, the bitter smile never leaving his face. I support you guys, 100%. I just need time to get used to it. How did you figure out, was it that obvious? Yamada asked, a wide smile on his face. He wasn't able to feel Midoriya's emotions yet, though he was picking up something wasn't right with the situation. I saw. He cut himself off. He couldn't bring himself to admit it in front of him how jealous he was when he saw them kissing. About time you looked. I was beginning to think you can only observe quirks. Yamada joked, leading Midoriya to the couch. So you wanted me to watch? Midoriya asked, now clearly confused. Well yeah, it's adorable. Yamada was beginning to get confused now. Were they on the same page? I mean, I guess it is? He mumbled. Yamada was unaware he was breaking his confused soulmate's heart little by little. Do you have any questions? I know this is big, you're bound to have some. They sat on the couch, though Yamada noted how much farther Midoriya was from him than usual. Should I sleep on the couch still or will I sleep in the guest bedroom? He asked, finally looking up at Yamada to see his hurt masking his joy. Sleep on the couch? Izuku, you're sleeping in the bed with us, why would you sleep on the couch still? Yamada asked. Something wasn't adding up anymore. Well, I don't want to get in the way. Izuku, what do you think I'm talking about? Midoriya felt a hand cup his cheek softly. He looked up to see the small yet hurt smile on his face. I thought you were trying to tell me you and Aizawa were together now, but don't worry, I won't break the bond and I will still cook dinner since you can't. Yamada had cut his rambling off with a quick kiss. It was short but fueled with the love he has held for his soulmate since they first started to talk. Izuku, for someone so observant you haven't seen what's right in front of you. Suddenly the door burst open to reveal a panicked Aizawa. Hisashi, what did you tell him? Aizawa was on his way to his favorite spot to start patrolling, but the moment he got there, Midoriya's anxiety had washed over him, sending him back home to make sure he was there and okay. Midoriya walked over to him quickly, grabbed his capture weapon, and pressed a kiss to his lips. From now on, we talk. I don't want to be left out of these conversations anymore. I thought you and Yamada were dating behind my back and I was ready to leave the bond behind to make sure you guys could be happy together. Warm tears flowed down his face. He pulled away. Ashamed, he was upset. He cast his gaze to the floor. I thought the people I loved we were leaving me again. Aizu, I'm sorry. Aizawa kneeled down, now looking up at Midoriya only to see him turn away, but his red face made it obvious he was upset and embarrassed. I didn't want you to feel pressured by me to accept Hisashi into the bond. I wasn't sure how you felt about him, but it's no excuse. You're right, it's not. I was preparing myself to spend however long sleeping on that couch until I was able to get an apartment and support myself. Yet I was afraid I would break the bond and hurt you. You don't understand what it's like to feel this alone, Aizawa. Aizawa wasn't sure what stung more, the fact that Midoriya is almost refusing to use his personal name or the fact that he hasn't talked about his past with him yet. I might not understand what it's like being you, but I know what it's like to feel alone. Aizawa kicked his shoes off, then walked towards the couch, guiding Midoriya. The one person who pushed me to do better before I met Hisashi, he was killed by a villain. Aizawa, it doesn't compare. I don't think what either of us has experienced so far will compare to the life you have lived so far. But I do know what it's like to feel alone, but being cut out from a relationship you have every right to be in. I don't know that feeling and I'm sorry you had to experience it. They were sitting on the couch. The tears had stopped flowing from Midoriya, but Aizawa now had glassy eyes. He doesn't talk about his past and there was a reason he didn't. Can I have time, please? Midoriya started. He felt the hurt from Aizawa but shook his head. It's not that I don't want to accept, I do, I just need time to sort myself out first because we have to listen to each other and talk, but I find it so hard to explain what's going on in my head and that isn't good. Take all the time you need, I'm in no rush. Yamada picked up his right hand, pressing a kiss to his knuckles. Nor am I. Aizawa copied Yamada though kissed his left hand, leaving Midoriya flustered beyond belief. Okay, he squeaked out, wanting to cover his face, but they hand his hands, preventing this. So adorable, Yamada mumbled, pressing a kiss to his head, then in one movement, he pulled Midoriya towards him, laughing as he did so. Is this going to be normal? Midoriya muttered in his chest, adjusting himself so he could lay comfortably on him. I'm more cuddly than Sho, he's just too horny, Yamada whispered the last part. It made Midoriya burst into laughter. Hizashi, what did you tell him? Aizawa grumbled, the blonde only shrugged his shoulders, feigning innocence. He's just giggly today, was all he said in response. Aizawa sighed and watched as Midoriya lifted his head and turned to look at him. Just because I said I needed time to think doesn't mean I don't want cuddles, Midoriya started, his face growing red. I mean we have a new bond so that never mind. He buried his face once more in Yamada's chest. He could feel the vibration of his giggles as Yamada stroked his curls. If you say so. Midoriya felt Aizawa shuffle behind him, then he draped his body on top of Midoriya. Aizawa, you're too heavy. He groaned, trying to turn around, but he was effectively pinned down by Aizawa. You said you wanted cuddles? Yeah, cuddles, not a human blanket. Yamada burst out into laughs at this. Even Aizawa chuckled before lifting himself up. Midoriya turned around then watched as Aizawa laid on his torso. They sat in peace before Aizawa crinkled his nose up. Why does the apartment smell like it's on fire? Notes. Okay, this domestic fluff actually got to me that I wrote like 2-3-ish chapters of this stuff because I would and could and I absolute adore them like this. Chapter 38. Notes. Ladies and gents, this is the moment you waited for. See the end of the chapter for more notes. This time Midoriya woke up in the bed, though he was hot and almost sweating. Yamada had insisted the night before that he would sleep in the middle of the bed. Though Midoriya told them he had to sort everything out, he still appreciated being included once again. The alarm blaring reminded him they had to get out of bed, or at least Midoriya did. He somehow pulled off the arms that were trapping him but trying to kick Yamada's leg off? Well, the man was clinger than cling wrap. He finally did it, turned the alarm off, and walked into the kitchen, fully awake due to the level of stealth he had to achieve without waking them up. Maybe something healthy this morning. He mumbled, looking around the cleaned kitchen. Last night he was sitting on the counter, instructing Yamada how to cook fish while Aizawa was being taught how to cook rice, though he knew what he was doing but preferred the way Midoriya made it. Yesterday they had a steamed fish and rice. It was basic but it was breakfast, so today he would make something a bit nicer. Miso soup, he mumbled, grabbing the ingredients for an egg and miso breakfast soup. As he was whisking in miso into the warm water, a pair of arms wrapped around his torso, then he pressed a kiss to his neck. Morning show, it didn't feel right calling his soulmate by his last name, even he grew sad to use it, but this was nice. How did you know it was me? He grumbled, his head now resting on top of Midoriya's as he watched him prepare breakfast. You kiss my neck, Zashi kisses my cheek? He said simply, adding in the eggs gently. He's kissed you enough to know that? Aizawa asked. Yamada still sound asleep in the bedroom. No, but so far you are the only one who kisses my neck, besides he doesn't have a constant scruff that tickles my neck. He muttered, concentrating on not breaking the yolks as they simmered in the broth. Like this? Aizawa proceeded to press light kisses to his neck, making sure he tickled his neck as he did. Show don't dash, he giggled loudly, trying to swat away his head, but only the sound of boil water made him swat him harder. Show, it's going to burn. Fine, he grumbled, letting Midoriya go so he could pull the pan off gently, adding the spinach then setting it back down and watching it simmer gently now. Once the spinach had wilted, he added salt and pepper before pulling and setting it on a hot plate on the table. Wake, Zashi, it needs to be eaten hot, Midoriya stated, setting down bowls and spoons. Aizawa sleepy pressed a kiss to his forehead then walked back into the bedroom. When he heard Yamada groan, he knew Aizawa had flopped down on top of him and waited until their soulmate woke up. Midoriya sat down and watched as Yamada trudged out. His glasses were crooked and hair down and disheveled. Morning Aizu. He pressed a kiss to his cheek then sat down, shooting Aizawa a smug smile. I told you so, was all Midoriya said before he started to serve his soulmates, though Aizawa shook his head. You're our lover, not our maid, he said simply, but Midoriya only smiled and continued to grab his bowl. Without me both of you would burn this entire complex down. He scooped up an egg, spinach, and broth before setting the bowl down and served Yamada. Why are you guys up so early? You don't start school for another hour? Wanted to get up with you Aizu, Yamada yawned, pressing another kiss to his forehead sleepily. Food looks good. Won't you fall back asleep when I leave? He asked, realizing he had to start the coffee machine for Aizawa. Grabbing his bowl, he brought it into the kitchen to eat while he started making coffee. Aizu, sit down and eat, I know how to make my coffee. Aizawa scolded. Midoriya only glared at him and added the last scoop of ground coffee then turned it on. So do I, he replied simply yet stubbornly as if making him breakfast and coffee is the perfect revenge. When do you have to leave? Yamada asked as Aizawa and Midoriya walked back into the living room to eat at the table. In 10 minutes, he replied, finishing off the soup quickly then running into the bedroom to change into his gym uniform, realizing Nedu wouldn't give me a chance to breathe if today's lesson would be any different than yesterday. Why the rush? Aizawa asked, walking towards the bedroom while Yamada followed, his arms wrapped around his waist and shuffled behind him. I know you guys, if I don't get ready now then have a moment to cuddle, I won't want to get up from cuddling to get ready. At the mention of morning cuddles, Yamada let go of Aizawa to walk over to a shirtless Midoriya who was trying to get dressed as fast as possible, both hiding the scars and making time for cuddles. Do your scars still make you feel uncomfortable? Aizawa asked, watching as he finished getting dressed then walked past him and into the bathroom. Yeah, there isn't anyone I'm comfortable showing my scars to yet. It's not easy to tell the story and people always want the story. Midoriya lifted his hand and reached into the medicine cabinet for his toothbrush and toothpaste but froze when his shirt started to be lifted. A pair of cold hands lingered over his scars, holding him protectively. A show? He stuttered. Aizawa didn't say anything. He only wrapped his arms around his torso, gently being mindful of the sensitive skin where he used to wear a back brace. Just finish getting ready, he mumbled. Yamada walked into the bathroom and only giggled. Look at Sho being affectionate. He managed to spit out between his laughs while Midoriya was brushing his teeth. He leaned over to spit the toothpaste out, rinsing his mouth out then put his toothbrush and toothpaste away. Looking in the mirror, he fixed his messy curls, then stared at Aizawa in the mirror. Are you serious? Midoriya asked, smiling while trying to be stern with his soulmate. I need to get ready to leave in a few minutes. A few minutes is plenty, Yamada said from the doorframe. Midoriya turned to him then sighed. Fine, a few minutes, but if I almost die because I was late it's your fault, both of your faults? Midoriya turned to look over his shoulder at Aizawa who slowly let him go, only for Yamada to grab his hand gently and lead him to the bed. Only a few minutes, Yamada agreed, falling back onto the bed. Midoriya followed then Aizawa. Once again, Aizawa placed his hands on his bare torso, showing that he loves every part of him. Can I cuddle you like that, Aizu? Yamada asked. Midoriya made it a point to look at Aizawa with a sassy glare. Look at that, someone I haven't been with that long asked if he could touch my scars. Show, look how nice that is. Midoriya wasn't too comfortable with people touching his scars but was more annoyed Aizawa didn't ask him than Yamada is for asking. Zashi, you can? Midoriya leaned up and pressed a quick kiss to his lips, making Yamada smile wider. He slid his hands under his shirt and held him tightly. You're just so adorable, Yamada sighed, leaning his cheek against the top of Midoriya's head. Midoriya didn't know how to respond. He just sat there, a blush obvious on his face. Aizawa was falling asleep again but Yamada lifted his head to see how embarrassed he was. Ah, you're blushing, Aizu, he giggled, pressing a kiss to his cheek. It only made him more embarrassed. Why are you so flustered? Why guys, well, are so affectionate and sea-caring? Midoriya stuttered out, turning towards Yamada. He lifted his head and moved down so he could look the boy in the eyes. It's because we want you to feel included. We didn't the first time, now we can't help but want you with us all the time, Yamada whispered, aware Aizawa was fast asleep. I still need time to think about everything. Yamada pressed a gentle kiss to his lips. one filled with passion and love. We know, we need to give you space, but at the same time the bond needs the attention, and Aizawa and I can't help but go overboard now that we're all together. He explained. Midoriya's eyes darted to his lips, then back up to look him in the eyes, suddenly aware he wants nothing more than to hold and kiss him. Seek him. His voice trailed off, afraid he would ruin their relationship by asking this already, but it was worth a shot. KK kiss you? Yamada froze, staring at Midoriya with a shocked gaze. Why kiss me? He asked. Two smart idiots who don't know how to go about kissing like they just hadn't kissed moments before are now stuck in a seeweisel of asking if the other wanted to kiss. Finally, Yamada did something about it. He leaned down and pressed a much harder kiss to his lips, then leaned up to ask Midoriya if it was okay. A pair of arms wrapped around the back of his neck, pulling him down for another kiss. With his hands still under his shirt, Yamada pulled the other out to prop himself up on the pillows. Midoriya tilted his head a bit, giving him better control over the teen, which Yamada liked. Slowly their lips moved, Midoriya timid at first since he's only kissed Aizawa like this only a couple of times. Yamada was afraid, but not for that reason. He didn't want to go overboard and scare Midoriya away. Their kisses got longer, they were pressed closer together, things were heating up and no one was going to stop it. Yamada nipped his bottom lip, making Midoriya giggle. Small actions that were supposed to be hot only made him giggle. But when Yamada accidentally pulled his hair, that's when the giggles stopped. Rather soft groans between the kisses were heard. Yamada lifted himself up and watched as he grabbed another fistful of hair and pulled. Midoriya subconsciously bared his neck, enjoying the little accident. Yamada took advantage of this. He pressed a small kiss on the corner of his mouth, then trailed down slowly, all while keeping his hair pulled and neck bared. Zizashi, he whined. His body felt so hot, but for the love of God he did not want him to stop. Yes, Aizu? Yamada lifted his head up from his neck and stared at the flustered teen who had screwed his eyes shut, then opened one slowly. Please don't stop, he pleaded. Yamada smiled, pressed a kiss to his jaw, then went back to his neck. Kissing, liking, small bites, just enough to make Midoriya crazy. He lazily dragged his hand up to his bare torso, his palm gliding over his right NPL. Midoriya arched his back, miming loudly at just the touch. Yamada smiled, pressing his lips to the base of his neck, then proceeded to bite and tick gently, marking the boy, while he ran his hand over his right NPL once again, this time stopping to pinch and pull slightly. And Yamada absolutely adored the noises he made, but the loud and please made this worth the wait. Zizashi he breathed, lifting his arms above his head to grip the pillows. Please Hizashi, Midoriya was calling his name, begging him to do more. As he lifted his shirt and slowly moved down to his bare skin, someone woke up. Are you guys really making out while I'm asleep? Aizawa asked out of nowhere. Midoriya suddenly yelped, shoving Yamada off of him and thus onto the floor. Are you serious, Sho? Yamada groaned. He wasn't upset at Midoriya, but rather Aizawa, who could have been awake for all of it but decided to wait until a heated moment to make himself known. Hi Sho, Midoriya stuttered out, curling up on himself, not because he was turned on, but because he was turned on. You have your mentorship with Nedu this F-. No one said anything as Midoriya practically fell out of the bed, scrambling to the bathroom to see if anything was too marked up. When he saw a small bruise on his collarbone, he turned to glare at Yamada, who propped himself up to stare at him. No kisses tonight That's what you get for For either of you. Midoriya looked towards Aizawa then Yamada, who both groaned, yet Yamada didn't care, it seemed. Might want to will that away, Aiz. Nedu is going to kill me. You will be burying me tonight. Midoriya shouted back to the bedroom as he was by the front door getting his shoes on, grabbing his case with his hero costume, then stared at Aizawa, who had padded out of the bedroom. Do I look like I just made out with my soulmate? He asked bluntly. Aizawa only scoffed and walked closer to him. He ruffled his hair, adjusted the collar of the gym uniform, then nodded. You're fine, good Midoriya bolted out the door, shout about dinner tonight when he accidentally slammed it, then shouted an apology. Hizashi, are you serious? Aizawa turned to see him sitting on the couch smugly. You didn't tell me he liked his hair pulled, or he was that being? He said, a smug smile resting on his face. though I will say the small cute noises he makes when you pull his hair are worth the dash. Aizawa grabbed his throat, pressing a heated kiss against his lips, so hard he almost drew blood. Bedroom. No. He growled. Yamada followed his movements as he raised his arms slowly, still holding his neck, then shoved him gently towards the direction of the room. Yes, sir. Yamada giggled, running towards the bedroom with a smug smile. You should have seen the way he clung to me. It felt so nice to top dash. Hizashi. Yamada stopped talking. He sat on the bed and waited for Aizawa, though the smile was still present on his face. Yes, sir? Strip. Yes, sir. Notes. So, not full smut but just leading into heavy petting and a look into their mornings together, of course. It won't always be super hot and heavy, but there are times where it's just sweet waking up and when you're in the mood to make breakfast for your partners. But I can't write full smut, which is why I asked a good friend of mine to write one for me. It won't be now, but someday it will be posted and y'all won't be ready for it. Smiley face. Chapter 39. Midoriya, you know better than to be late. I'm sorry, Nedu. Midoriya hung his head low. Being scolded by a friend wasn't ideal, but they were teacher and students, so it had to happen a few times. I take it you and your soulmates made up? Midoriya's head snapped up, confused and slightly flustered that someone knew. How did dash? You are never late for these things, plus you forgot a lunch, which is very unlike you. Nedu wasn't going to embarrass him even more and mentioned the rather large love bite that sat on his collarbone. Why, we talked and we share a so dash. Is he here yet? It was Midnight who barged into the room, a wide smile covering her face. Hi, Nuri. She crushed him in a big hug. Spill all the details. What dash? I can see the hickey right there. Who did it? Midoriya turned to look at Nedu with a shocked face, then looked at Midnight. And maybe later, I have to start training? He asked. She sighed, then nodded sadly. Over lunch, speaking of, we have to leave now if we're going to get you to Hosu in time. Nedu nodded and started to walk over to the pair. Hosu? Midoriya asked, looking down at his gym uniform, then at the metal case. Well, I suppose you need to change first before we leave. Hosu is where I used to have an agency before moving out here and working at UA. A friend of mine still runs the agency, so I thought it would be best, after recognizing you have the basic fighting ability, enough to stand your ground, to visit him. A large smile broke out on Midoriya's face. This was his first time going out in his new hero costume. He burst out of the office and into the hall, where he promptly ran into someone. A student? Look who it is, the quirkless soulmate of 1A. A voice called above him. He opened his eyes to look up at Monoma, who was sneering down at him. Where's your soulmate now? At home, he spat, getting up then brushing his clothes off. What do you want? Nothing. You ran into me after all. Someone with a quirk running into the quirkless? How sad you must feel. He smiled, then it dropped suddenly. What are you doing here, quirkless soulmate? I have a mentorship with Nedu. We are heading to Hosu once I get changed. Monoma glared at Midoriya. If looks could kill, he would have been long dead. Where is your mentorship at? Midoriya didn't like being petty, but oh, did this boy deserve it. He gritted his teeth, sighed, then smiled. It doesn't matter, I'm alive and in a healthy state of mind. He did a once-over of Midoriya, though the scars and your attitude could say otherwise for you. Midoriya prayed to any god, just hoping he wouldn't jump the boy right here. At least I have a better attitude than your PSS poor one. You're upset you got beat by a quirkless student who somehow found their soulmate in class. Have you found your soulmate yet? Monoma didn't answer. Midoriya walked by then sighed. I'm sorry if I bought anything up. I don't like being mean, sorry. Midoriya walked by without turning back, then into the bathroom to change his clothes, his body shaking as he did so. I am quirkless, but it doesn't matter. Aizawa and Yamada both care for me, he thought, a confident smile growing on his face. He opened the door to the stall, looking around, then looked in the mirror. His heart soared as he stared at his body. The scars made him upset, but staring at the soul mark that laid in the middle of his chest made the look worth it. The bunny sat in the middle, practically purring as the cat was nuzzling and cleaning him, his body wrapped around the small bunny, while the cockatiel sat on the cat, fluffing itself up then nuzzling the bunny's head with his own. Care, he mumbled, tracing the marks slowly. It only made him more determined to prove to the world anyone can be a hero. He quickly got dressed, no longer worried if people would see him, then snapped on his new gear. It was heavy and made his sore joints ache just a bit more, yet he was ecstatic to be wearing this gear. He was going to be a quirkless pro hero. Midoriya? A voice called. He stepped out of the bathroom, his clothes in the box that once held his hero costume, then saw Kayama calling for him. Nuri? He asked. She turned her head, then smiled widely at him. Looking good, Midori. Are you ready to go? As excited as Midoriya was, Kayama came in a close second. She wanted to see what he could do, wanted to help him grow, and this was the best way to watch him in action. Yeah, do I just leave this in Nezu's office? He asked, gesturing to the silver box. Izuku. Midoriya turned his head to see Yamada waving towards him, a large smile on his face. He smiled widely, running towards him and hugging him tightly. The bond was practically humming as they held each other, though Yamada winced when Midoriya hugged too tightly. Are you okay? Midoriya asked, pinging his head to the side slightly. Yamada nodded, then leaned down. Remember when I said Sho was the horny one? He whispered. Midoriya nodded in confusion, then it clicked. What did you do? He asked. Yamada laughed, then pressed a quick kiss to his lips. Almost you. Midoriya once again looked at him with a confused stare. His brows furrowed, then they climbed his forehead when he realized what had really happened. So you got? Yeah. And you like that? Don't knock it till you try it. Yamada pressed another kiss to his lips, then straightened up. Kayama was behind them, giggling. Did Aizawa do it again? She giggled. Yamada nodded, making sure his speaker was on correctly, though Midoriya was once again confused as F-. Do what again? Without missing a beat, Kayama answered. Fing and punishing Yamada until he has issues walking. Midoriya snapped his head towards Kayama, then Yamada, who was trying his best not to laugh at Midoriya's reaction. A devious smile crept up Midoriya's face. He motioned for Yamada to bend down so he could say something to him. Can I watch it next time? I don't think I understand what you're talking about. Then pressed a kiss to his cheek, trying to keep an innocent face, but failing. Yamada, on the other hand, was internally freaking out. He knows Midoriya is only teasing him, but he can't help to think it's true. Okay, break it up before you start fing each other in the hall. We are heading out to Hosu today. Nezu's got someone there that can help Midoriya better than we can. Kayama rushed out, grabbing Midoriya by his arm, then pulled him away. Midoriya waved with a cheeky smile, knowing the state he left his soulmate in. That was quite devious of you, Kayama said, a smirk resting loosely on her lips as it lifted into a wide smile. You have any idea what state you left him in? I'm aware. I don't like the idea of revenge, but they did leave me hanging for 2 days, almost 3. I could have broken the bond in that state, and I don't think they realize it. He sighed. It was a heavy topic, one that laid towards the front of his mind, almost dragging him down. I need to talk to them about it, properly, but for now, I just tease and talk, just until I feel comfortable enough talking about it. So you can't talk about your bond, but you can talk about watching them F-? Kayama asked, obviously listening to their conversation. It's called deflecting. Now will you stop dragging me, or will I be a ragdoll? Midoriya asked. Every ounce of sass he had was now being projected towards her. Well, you are cute like one, she fired back, dragging him behind her still. Don't whine when we are almost at the entrance anyway. They walked, well, Kayama was insistent on dragging him through the halls, then through the entrance where a car was waiting in the front. Kayama smiled widely, opening the door that pushed him through, forgetting he still had his box for his hero costume in his grasp. Are we ready to go? Nedu asked, setting down a book he was reading. Midoriya nodded sheepishly, then the door shut and they drove off to the train station. Stain sat leaning against the bar, sharpening a blade when Toga hopped on by and sat down next to him. So, she started, propping her face up with her hands, can I borrow one of your swords? No, he growled, glaring at her, then looked down at the sword and continued to sharpen it. That's not fair, you should always share your things. She pouted, then stormed off. Something about stabbing someone? What will you do when you meet Midoriya? Shigaraki asked. There was no set plan yet, Sensei hasn't said anything, so he was curious to see Stain's take on the plan. Corner him, confront him, there is a spotlight cast on his class, specifically him, and I want to see if that's changed him at all. He might not be the same boy you found amusing a month ago. Stain challenged, sheathing the sword then smiling at Shigaraki. I see, he mumbled, scratching his neck harshly then stopped to stare at him. Don't kill that kid. If he isn't worthy If he isn't worthy to be a hero then he's a villain, simple, Dabi had said suddenly alerting the others he was listening to the conversation. But he refused already. Stain argued after all his bloodlust needed to be sated and it was hard to keep it so. I've come to realize these people are persistent. If they want the boy then they will get him. Dabi turned to walk out of the room. I've learned not to fight it, you should too. Tamura, a deep voice called. Shigaraki turned towards the T to V, clearly happy. Sensei, when do we move? He asked. No one in the room dared talk while Sensei was speaking. Tonight, take a Nomu and head into Hosu. Many heroes will be there with their students, all there to learn. He chuckled, then the mic went silent for a moment. After all, what better way to learn than show them the true life of a hero? Chapter 40. Notes. Finally the hero killer arc truly starts. Yeah, I guess it started like 35-ish, but this is when we really see the twisted personality of Stain and why they want Midoriya so badly. See the end of the chapter for more notes. I thought we had a deal, hero killer, Shigaraki mumbled. Currently he was pinned to the floor by Stain, a knife on either side of his head. You can't accomplish anything without conviction and longing, he growled, shoving the knife deeper into the ground. Without those you will always be a weakling. Achieving nothing. That's how you got here. He twisted the knife in his shoulder, though Shigaraki only gritted his teeth, not giving him the satisfaction of his pain. Hey now, you're being a little rough aren't you? Shigaraki asked, staring back up at Stain with tired eyes. Kurogyari, take this guy back? He snapped trying to crane his neck up to look at him but it was no use, he couldn't see his partner. I'm sorry I can't move, he gritted out, his body shaking. It must be the hero killer's quirk at work. The word's hero has lost its meaning in this society. The world is overrun by fakes and criminals like you who chase petty dreams. They must all be purged. He brought the knife closer to his neck, to the hand that rested on his face, but Shigaraki grabbed it with his full hand. What do you think you're doing? If you touch this palm the blade cracked, startling Stain, then disintegrated where he touched it. I'll kill you. You sure talk a lot, hero killer, he continued. Stain only watched as the blade grew blacker and darker. Conviction? Maybe I don't have anything as loaded as that. He broke the blade. If I had to choose a longing though. Stain watched as Shigaraki sighed, his gaze lingering on the torn poster of All Might then started back up into his eyes. It would be killing All Might? The hero killer didn't know how to feel. He came in with the intent to kill the League but as Shigaraki spoke, his gaze darted between his eyes and the poster. Yeah, kill All Might, I'll destroy their symbol of peace, then crush them while they're in shock. His smile was wide as he spoke. Stain shuddered in what felt like fear for the first time in years too. Shigaraki swung an open palm towards his face, making Stain jump back, his blade still out while the other one sat half disintegrated on the floor. My injuries were just healing up too. You should learn not to play with knives. We don't have a healer in our party you know. He scratched his throat with his good hand, annoyed that he was touched and his personal space was invaded. The rest of the League knew not to get too close. And yet he just stabbed him. I see your nature, Stain started, making Shigaraki gasp. I see our goals fundamentally oppose each other, however, this wasn't in vain. It seems like we both want to destroy the present I'm over this, leave, drop dead. Shigaraki cut him off, turning around. I will still find your boy though, Stain called, making the other man stop in his tracks. Your description of him has left an impression on me. I want to see if he lives up to your Midoriya Izuku belongs to the League. You don't belong to the League, he growled, though Stain only smiled, sheathing the blade. I will do what I want, with whom I want. Shigaraki, his name spat like poison, and Midoriya seems like a fine boy. He might just take my name, be the successor I have been looking for. I will kill you if you come near us again. That includes coming near Midoriya Izuku. With that Shigaraki stalked off, itching his neck harshly. Stain only smirked and walked out of the room, sated with the chaos he caused. Midoriya? He was awoken with a start. The train ride was making him very sleepy. He had quite the morning after all. Sorry, I'm just tired. Though his mind was exhausted, The bond was already greeting him with love and affection from his soulmates. A warm smile tugged at his lips. He pulled a glove off to see the bonds running down his arm onto his hand, then back up out of sight. They must love you, Nedu said, his tone warm. I've never seen a bond that active before. I guess they do, but I put the relationship on hold for a bit. This made Kiyama practically jump from her seat across from him. They were in a first-class train only because Nedu insisted. Why did you do that? Those guys want nothing more than to take care of you, she said, adjusting herself then crossing her legs. Because I need to work on myself first. It almost didn't work because Sho didn't talk about the new bond with Zashi. But there are things I can't face yet, people I can't face yet, and even if I did, it wouldn't heal me right away. He fiddled with his clothes, his gaze kept down in his lap. I have issues talking to people about things that go through my brain, bad things, and I can't do that to them. He sighed, then continued, I can't just shut my soulmates out of my head because communicating is too dash. Hey, okay, coming from an R18 hero, Nedu, you might not want to listen. I want my job still. She turned to look at Nedu, who had nodded, taking headphones out of a small bag. Though I am aware of your hobbies out of school, as a sign of respect I won't listen. He pressed a small music player that was obviously made for his paws, then proceeded to hum the tune. Well, I have had partners. What you have is a polyamorous relationship. I've had a few of these relationships actually, she sighed, patting the seat next to her. Midoriya quickly jumped over, then turned to look at the hero. You guys, for all that it's worth, need to communicate. Shoyuta had good intentions, not telling you when you first bonded and when Hisashi joined. He didn't want you to feel like you had to say yes. Being in a teaching position, he didn't want to influence you to say yes, and when Hisashi joined he didn't want me to say yes for his sake? Midoriya asked, feeling guilty for jumping to such conclusions. What made it worse was that Aizawa was already sending reassurance through the bond and Yamada sent a text. Though Yamada and Midoriya weren't at the stage of feeling the other's emotions yet, Aizawa would tell him when he felt negative emotions. Yeah, and you're right to take time for yourself to sort your brain out. I can't imagine what you've gone through, but you need to know that it's good to rely on your partners, your soulmates. They are your soulmates for a reason, Aizu. You could kill someone and those idiots would help you hide the body. A smile broke out across his face when she said that. No, Zashi would help me. Aizawa would just watch and criticize us at our attempts, then help us? Both giggled, knowing the men too well. Kiyama ruffled his hair, a small smile now resting on her face. They care about you, Izuku, a lot more than Dash. The mood was broken suddenly when large claws dug into the side of the train, ripping a piece off, then it stepped through. Midoriya froze, staring in fear at the creature, then masking it with a look of determination. Midoriya, do you know what that is? Nedu asked, shouting as the creature bent down, ready to attack. No.